Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the sooty, sulphurous world of a 19th century London gasworks, where men turned coal into light, one dangerous shovelful at a time. You'll trudge through pre-dawn darkness toward industrial hellscapes that powered Victorian street lamps and cozy parlours, all while breathing air that could literally kill you. Imagine waking before the sun even considers rising, strapping on boots that never quite dry, and heading to a place where explosions are just part of the daily routine. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive to retirement if this becomes your career. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing this little community span the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The alarm doesn't exist yet, not the kind you'd recognize anyway. Instead, it's the knocker-upper's pole tapping your second-story window at 4 in the morning, a paid profession that won't feel quaint or charming when you're jolted from whatever shallow sleep you managed. You're awake instantly, though your body screams otherwise. The room you share with your wife and 3 children in this Bethnal Green tenement measures perhaps 12 feet square, and the air inside tastes like yesterday's cabbage and coal smoke that seeps through every crack in the plaster. Your wife doesn't stir, she's learned to sleep through your departures. The youngest coughs in the darkness, that wet rattle you've been pretending isn't getting worse. You dress by feel because lighting a candle costs money. The same shirt you wore yesterday, stiff with dried sweat, and something tarry you can't quite name. Trousers that could stand up on their own. Boots that squelch slightly from whatever you stepped in at the works you've stopped investigating. There's a crust of bread wrapped in cloth on the shelf, and you pocket it without ceremony. Your wife will have packed something more substantial for your midday meal, probably tucked in the tin pail by the door, but that's hours away. Right now, you need something to quiet your stomach's complaints. The streets of East London before dawn operate on a different frequency than daylight hours. You're not alone out here. Thousands of men are converging on factories, docks, breweries, and works of every description. The Metropolitan Police estimate that by 1880, over 60,000 Londoners work night shifts or begin their days before 5 a.m., though historians still argue whether those figures account for the informal economy of street sweepers and costermongers. You join this silent army, a river of flat caps and lunch pails flowing through streets lit only by the occasional gas lamp. Ironic, given where you're headed. The lampposts themselves are works of Victorian engineering. Cast iron painted Brunswick green, each one representing about 12 hours of your labour to purchase, though you've never done the math because why torture yourself? The fog tonight is particularly thick, a proper pea souper that the newspapers will call London particular, with that twee affection reserved for things that aren't actively killing them in their comfortable offices. You know better. This isn't romantic atmospheric mist, it's coal smoke, factory effluent, and river vapour condensed into a yellow-grey blanket that makes your eyes water and your throat close. You wrap your neckerchief over your nose and mouth, not that it helps much. The fog tastes metallic, sulphurous, alive with chemistry you don't understand but recognise as poison. You're 15 minutes into your walk when the smell hits you. Even through the fog, even through the general miasma of industrial London, you recognise it, the gasworks. That distinctive reek of coal being tortured into submission, of sulphur compounds and ammonia and coal tar all mixing into an olfactory assault that announces you're getting close to work, and your life continues to be terrible. Some of the greenhorns retch their first week. You barely notice anymore, which probably says something about human adaptability that a philosopher might find profound. You just find it depressing. The Thames runs somewhere to your right, invisible in the darkness, but audible in that heavy, sluggish way that speaks of industrial waste and questionable organic matter. The gasworks sits on the river because coal arrives by barge, tons upon tons shipped down from Newcastle's mines, the black diamonds that fuel Britain's imperial ambitions one domestic gas lamp at a time. Your particular works, the Beckton Gasworks in East Ham, is one of the largest in the world, though company propaganda claiming it's the largest gasworks on Earth might be stretching the truth. Still, 600 acres of industrial machinery is nothing to sneeze at, though you do sneeze at it constantly, because the air quality is somewhere between mining accident and actively on fire. The flaming stacks appear first, orange-red towers of burning excess gas that can't be stored or distributed, so it's simply set alight to prevent accumulation and explosion. They're visible through the fog like demon pillars, and there's something almost biblical about the sight. Welcome to hell, basically, except hell probably has better ventilation. You're close enough now to hear the machinery, that constant industrial symphony of clanking chains, hissing steam, rumbling furnaces. It never stops. Even on Christmas, even on Sundays when decent folk are in church, the gasworks keeps breathing, keeps converting coal into light for a city that's decided darkness is unacceptable. The gates loom ahead, iron and brick, with the company name cast in letters you've long since stopped reading. The gatehouse keeper nods as you pass. He knows your face, knows you're not one of the troublemakers or union agitators the company fears. You're just another body, another pair of hands willing to trade health for shillings. Beyond the gates, the works sprawls like a mechanical nightmare, all retort houses and purifying chambers, and those massive gasometers rising like industrial cathedrals. Somewhere in the complex, a whistle shrieks. 4:30. Time to clock in and begin another day of slowly poisoning yourself for wages. The timekeeper's hut sits just inside the main gate, a brick structure that's somehow both cramped and imposing. A line of men snakes out its door, maybe 20 deep, each waiting to have their existence officially acknowledged by the company. You take your place behind a fellow whose name you don't know but whose cough you recognize, wet, rattling, the sound of lungs making poor life choices. Nobody speaks. This isn't a social hour. Dawn hasn't even considered breaking, and conversation requires energy you're saving for the 12 hours ahead. The system is elegant in its efficiency and soul-crushing in its thoroughness. Each man carries a metal token with his employee number stamped into it, a small disc that essentially represents your entire worth to the company. You've been number 247 for 3 years now, ever since you graduated from casual laborer to permanent staff, a promotion that felt significant until you realized it just meant you were trapped more reliably. The timekeeper, a wizened man named Hodges who seems to have been born wearing a visor and sleeve garters, sits behind a desk with a massive ledger and a clock that probably cost more than your annual wages. You shuffle forward. The man ahead of you hands over his token, and Hodges squints at it, then at the man's face, then back at the token, as if employee 231 might have secretly swapped identities overnight. This happens every single morning. Company policy dictates that each worker must be visually verified because apparently there's a thriving black market in impersonating gasworks. Labourers, a crime that ranks somewhere between pathetically desperate and clearly having a mental breakdown. Satisfied that 231 is indeed himself, Hodges marks the ledger with a flourish that suggests this bureaucratic moment represents the pinnacle of his day. Stamps the time 4:47 a.m. on a card and slides the token back. Your turn. You hand over 247 and Hodges performs the same theatrical inspection. His eyes are roomy behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and you notice his fingers are stained yellow-brown, probably from the same coal tar that's slowly staining your entire existence. He nods, marks your arrival, and then here's where your day's trajectory gets determined, consults a second sheet of paper. This is the assignment roster, where foremen have indicated which sections need bodies and which particular bodies they want. Retort house, Hodges announces, his voice carrying all the sympathy of a magistrate pronouncing transportation to Australia. Your stomach drops. Of course. The retort house, where coal gets converted to gas through the magic of extreme heat and probable death. It's not the worst assignment that would be descending into the purifying chambers or dealing with the tar pits, but it's solidly in the top 3 of places you'd rather not spend 12 hours. Historians generally agree that retort house workers in Victorian gasworks had the shortest life expectancies of any industrial labourers, except possibly match girls, though some scholars argue that statistical record-keeping was too poor to make definitive claims. Lovely, you mutter, which Hodges ignores because he's already moving to the next man. You pocket your token and step aside, joining the smaller stream of workers headed toward the retort house complex. There's a camaraderie among retort house workers, born from shared suffering and the knowledge that you're all slowly being cooked from the outside in. A fellow named Jack falls into step beside you. He's been here 5 years, which makes him either incredibly resilient or incredibly stupid, possibly both. "Retorts again?" he asks, though he can tell from your expression. "Lucky us. Herd number 3 is running hot. McKinley says it nearly blew a door yesterday." This is not reassuring information. A retort door blowing means superheated gas escaping under pressure, which can either blind you, burn you, or introduce you to your maker, depending on proximity and divine whimsy. The company insists the retorts are safe, engineered to German specifications, guaranteed not to explode more than occasionally. Their safety pamphlets feature cheerful diagrams that bear no resemblance to the cast iron monsters you'll be tending. The retort house looms ahead now, a long brick building with a pitched roof and windows set high up where they'll do absolutely nothing to improve ventilation. Steam rises from various joints and seams, giving the whole structure the appearance of a sleeping dragon. The comparison is apt because dragons are mythological creatures that burn people alive, which is essentially the building's primary function. You can already feel the heat radiating from it, and you're still 30 feet away. A foreman stands at the entrance, clipboard in hand, checking off arrivals. This is Walker, a middle-aged man with magnificent mutton chops and a disposition suggesting he ate something sour in 1873 and never quite recovered. He's a charge hand, technically a worker who got promoted to bully other workers, earning perhaps an extra 2 shillings a week for the privilege of being hated. The company loves charge hands because they're cheap supervision, and charge hands love the tiny amount of power because it's the only authority they'll ever possess in their entire lives. "You're late," Walker announces, which is categorically untrue since you clocked in at 4:47 and shift doesn't start until 5. "Clock says different," you reply, keeping your voice neutral. "This is a game you play every few days." Walker likes to establish dominance through petty accusations, and you're too tired to care about proper submission. Walker's mustache twitches, but he doesn't push it. Instead, he consults his clipboard with exaggerated care. "Right then, you're on number 6 retort. Coal shoveling until 8, then door tending. Break at 9:10, dinner at 12:30. Any questions?" You have approximately 1,000 questions, starting with "Why does God permit suffering?" and ending with "Is there any chance I could switch to literally any other job?" but you just shake your head. Walker makes a mark on his clipboard and gestures toward the door with his pencil. "In you go then, and try not to die today. Paperwork's a nightmare." Ah yes, workplace safety motivated entirely by bureaucratic inconvenience. Truly, these are enlightened times. You push through the door, and the heat hits you like a physical wall, like walking into an oven, like every metaphor for too bloody hot compressed into one atmospheric assault. Welcome to your workday. Try not to think about the fact that you'll be here until 6 o'clock tonight, that your lungs are already protesting, that the bread in your pocket will be rock hard and tasteless after 12 hours in this inferno. The machinery beckons, all cast iron and fire and industrial revolution glory. The interior of the retort house resembles a Victorian engineer's fever dream crossed with a medieval torture chamber. 2 rows of massive cast iron retorts line the length of the building, each one a horizontal cylindrical furnace about 9 feet long and perhaps 18 inches in diameter, arranged in banks that stack 3 or 4 high. They're sealed into brick settings, creating walls of furnaces that radiate heat with the enthusiasm of small suns. The mathematical reality is that you're standing in a space containing dozens of chambers, maintaining temperatures around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, converting solid coal into flammable gas through destructive distillation. A process that sounds academic and civilized until you're actually standing next to it, watching metal glow cherry red. The noise is immediate and layering. There's the deep rumble of the furnaces themselves, that low-frequency growl of combustion happening at industrial scale. Overlaying that, the metallic clanking of doors being opened and shut, the scrape of rakes and shovels against iron, the hiss of steam from various joints and seals. Men shout to each other across the space, not conversing so much as exchanging information at volumes calibrated to overcome the mechanical symphony. Door 3, someone bellows. Raking number 7, comes the reply. It's a language of survival, making sure everyone knows what's happening so nobody accidentally walks into a blast of superheated gas. The lighting comes from the furnaces themselves, that hellish orange glow leaking from observation ports and gaps around doors, supplemented by a few gas lamps mounted high on the walls, gas lamps in a gasworks, powered by the very product you're manufacturing, which creates a certain philosophical circularity that would be poetic if you had any energy for poetry. The overall effect is less workspace and more the underworld as imagined by William Blake after several drinks. Your eyes adjust gradually, and you start picking out details. The floor is brick, swept clean of major debris but permanently stained with coal dust and tar residue that no amount of maintenance can remove. Rails run down the center of the building, narrow-gauge tracks for wheeling coal in and ash out. At the far end, a massive pile of coal sits in the charging bay, each lump selected for size and quality. The company has very specific requirements about what coal works best for gas production. Historians still argue whether Newcastle coal or Welsh anthracite produced superior gas yields in Victorian works, with competing schools of thought publishing contradictory studies well into the 1920 seconds. The retorts themselves are works of engineering that deserve more appreciation than they receive. Each one is essentially a horizontal cylinder set into brickwork, with charging doors at one end and discharging doors at the other. The coal goes in one side, gets heated to oblivion for several hours while sealed tight, and the resulting gas gets drawn off through pipes connected to the top. What remains coke, mostly, along with various residues, gets raked out the other end. Simple in concept, absolutely brutal in execution. The retorts are manufactured by companies like Livesey or Coase, cast iron beauties that can supposedly withstand years of thermal cycling between cold and 2000 degrees. Supposedly is doing heavy lifting in that sentence. A worker you recognize, Tommy, maybe? Names are hard in this chaos, is standing at one of the lower retorts with a long iron rake pulling out spent coke through the discharge door. The coke glows red-orange, still radiating enough heat to set clothing alight if you're careless. He works with practiced efficiency, raking the incandescent material into an iron wheelbarrow designed to survive apocalyptic conditions. Sweat pours down his face, which is already black with coal dust, except for the tracks where perspiration has carved clean channels. He'll go through several shirts a shift if he's smart, wringing them out and swapping for slightly less saturated options. If he's not smart, he'll just wear the same soaked garment all day and wonder why he's constantly dizzy. Your assignment is retort number 6, which sits in the middle bank, conveniently at chest height, so you won't have to climb or crouch excessively. Small mercies. The retort is currently in its heating phase, which means coal is inside being converted to gas, and your job for the next few hours is to ensure it stays at optimal temperature. Too hot, and you risk damaging the retort or creating excess tar. Too cool, and gas production drops, and the company starts asking uncomfortable questions about efficiency. A thermometer would be useful here. Perhaps some scientific instrument to measure exact temperatures. Instead, you have your eyes and experience. You approach the observation port, a small opening with a sliding cover, and flip it open. A wave of heat blasts your face, and you instinctively pull back. The interior glows like looking into the sun, that bright yellow-white that makes your eyes water. This is approximately correct. The color tells you temperature. Red means you need to stoke the external fires. Yellow is good. White means ease off before something fails catastrophically. It's an entire technical education compressed into reading incandescent colors, a skill that takes months to develop, and which will do absolutely nothing for your future career prospects unless Victorian London suddenly develops a need for people who can judge temperature by luminescence. The external fires, because of course each retort needs its own heating system, burn beneath and around each cylinder. Your job includes shoveling coal into these fires, adjusting air dampers, and generally keeping the whole operation at that sweet spot where gas production is maximized and explosions are minimized. The company calls this scientific gasification. You call it trying not to die while doing chemistry you don't understand. A quirky bit of Gasworks folklore. Some old-timers claim you can tell coal quality by how it sings when heating. Good Newcastle coal supposedly produces a steady hiss, while inferior stuff pops and cracks. Whether this is actual acoustic analysis or superstition passed down through generations of workers is anyone's guess, but you've noticed the pattern yourself. Right now, retort 6 is hissing contentedly, which you choose to interpret as a good sign. The smell in here is complex and aggressive. Coal smoke, yes, but also sulfur compounds, ammonia, benzene, and various hydrocarbons that probably have names, but which you experience simply as the bad smell. Your nose will stop noticing after an hour, a biological mercy that's probably also slowly poisoning you. The company doctor, yes. There's a company doctor, which sounds progressive until you realize he's paid to declare workers fit regardless of symptoms, insists the fumes are harmless with adequate ventilation. The ventilation consists of those high windows and the breeze increasing today. Occasional draft, so make of that what you will. Around you, perhaps 30 other men tend their assigned retorts, each one absorbed in their particular mechanical relationship. It's oddly intimate, this dance between human and furnace, worker and industrial process. You'll spend the next 12 hours here, feeding fires, monitoring temperatures, and trying to avoid the accidents that claim fingers, eyes, and occasionally lives. The shift has barely started, and already your shirt is soaked. Walker appears at your elbow with the timing of a man who enjoys interrupting moments of relative peace. Right then, 247. Retort 6 needs charging in 90 minutes. You're on coal detail until then. Wheelbarrows by the charging bay. He doesn't wait for acknowledgement, just moves on to terrorize the next worker. Clipboard clutched like a talisman against actual manual labor. Coal detail. Of course, because tending a 2,000-degree furnace wasn't quite enough physical exertion for one morning. You make your way toward the charging bay at the far end of the building, weaving between workers and equipment with the practiced caution of someone who's seen what happens when you don't look where you're going. A man lost 3 toes last month when a wheelbarrow of hot coke rolled over his foot. The company doctor declared him fit for light duty after a week, which tells you everything about Victorian workplace medicine. The wheelbarrows are lined up like iron soldiers, each one a masterpiece of utilitarian design. These aren't your garden variety domestic wheelbarrows for hauling petunias. These are industrial beasts, all iron construction with a single wheel at front, designed to carry loads that would make a Carthorse reconsider its career choices. The company specification calls for each barrow to manage 400 weight. That's roughly 450 pounds for those keeping track in less archaic units. In practice, you'll load it with whatever you can physically push, which varies depending on whether you've eaten breakfast and how much your back is already complaining. The coal pile dominates the charging bay, a black mountain of geological compressed history. Each lump represents millennia of plant matter squeezed under pressure until it became fuel for Victorian ambitions. The company sources from various collieries, primarily Newcastle and Durham, though there's ongoing debate among engineers about optimal coal composition for gas production. Some swear by high volatile bituminous coal, others prefer lower sulfur varieties, and historians still argue whether these preferences were based on actual chemistry or regional pride masquerading as technical expertise. You grab a shovel from the rack, heavy iron, wooden handle worn smooth by countless hands, probably older than you are. The shovel blade is broad and flat, designed for scooping rather than digging, and it makes a satisfying scrape and chunk sound when you drive it into the coal pile. There's a rhythm to this work, a physical poetry that your body understands even if your mind rebels. Drive the shovel, lift, pivot, dump into the wheelbarrow, repeat. Each scoop weighs maybe 15 pounds, which means you'll need 30-odd scoops to fill the barrow to working capacity. That's simple mathematics you'd rather not think about too carefully. The coal has a peculiar texture under the shovel. It breaks apart with sharp edges, creating dust that rises and hangs in the air like a sooty fog. This dust is getting into your lungs with every breath, adding to the accumulated damage of weeks and months and years. Victorian doctors are just beginning to understand pneumoconiosis, black lung disease, though the gasworks owners insist their coal dust is somehow less harmful than mining coal dust. A distinction that future medical science will reveal as complete nonsense. For now, you just breathe and cough and pretend everything's fine. 5 scoops in, and you're already sweating. The heat from the retorts combines with physical exertion to create a special kind of misery. Your shirt clings to your back, and you can feel coal dust sticking to the sweat, creating a grimy paste that will require serious scrubbing. To remove scrubbing you won't do because you'll be too exhausted, so you'll just climb into bed tonight leaving black stains on sheets that were probably white once, years ago. 10 scoops. 15. Your shoulders are developing that deep ache that promises they'll be screaming by afternoon. A piece of coal catches your thumb, drawing blood through the grime. You don't stop. Minor injuries are so common they barely register. You'll have a collection of cuts, burns, and bruises by day's end, a constellation of industrial damage mapped across your body. 20 scoops. The wheelbarrow is getting heavy now, maybe 300 pounds. You should probably stop soon, but there's a perverse pride in loading it as full as possible. Fewer trips means less time wasted. Besides, the other workers are watching, and nobody wants to be the weak link, the one who can't pull his weight. Literally, in this case. 25. 30. The wheelbarrow is loaded, a small mountain of black geological history ready for conversion to modern illumination. You set down the shovel and grab the barrow's handles. They're positioned at waist height, designed for levering the weight forward onto that single wheel. Here's where physics becomes your friend or enemy depending on your technique. Too far forward and the barrow tips, spilling coal everywhere and earning you walker's wrath. Too far back and you're carrying the full weight in your arms, which is a recipe for a hernia. You find the balance point and lift. The barrow tilts forward, weight transferring to the wheel, and you start pushing. The wheel squeals. It needs oil, has needed oil for weeks, but maintenance is always tomorrow's problem. You navigate toward retort 6, careful to stay on the rail tracks because pushing 400 pounds through loose coal dust is how you learn colourful new swear words. Another worker passes you going the opposite direction, his barrow empty, and he nods, that universal gesture of solidarity among men doing terrible jobs. His face is black except for his eyes and teeth, making him look like a photographic negative. You probably look identical. Somewhere, a social reformer is writing a pamphlet about working conditions in gasworks, filled with shocking descriptions and calls for legislation. That pamphlet won't change anything for years, possibly decades. But it's nice to know someone's thinking about you, theoretically. You reach retort 6, and now comes the fun part, actually getting this coal into the retort without killing yourself. The charging door is at chest height, a cast iron portal secured with heavy bolts. Inside, the previous load has been converted to gas and coke, and the retort is theoretically empty and cool enough for recharging. Theoretically is, once again, doing heroic work. You set down the wheelbarrow and prepare to begin the charging process. Your arms already ache, and you've barely started. 11.5 hours to go. Living the dream. The charging door bolts are hot to touch, even through the leatherwork gloves you've learned to keep in your pocket. They're standard issue company gloves, thick cowhide that's been burned and patched so many times, they're more scar tissue than original material. You work the bolts loose, metal squealing against metal, and swing the door open. Heat pours out like a living thing, that immediate blast of residual warmth from the previous charge cycle. The retort interior glows dully red, which means it's cool to maybe 800 degrees, cool enough to charge without the coal immediately igniting, hot enough to start the next heating cycle efficiently. You grab the first shovelful of coal from the wheelbarrow and heave it through the opening. The coal lands with a clatter and tumble sound, bouncing off the curved iron walls. Another shovel, another. You develop a rhythm, working quickly because the open door is bleeding heat and affecting the adjacent retorts. The company engineers have calculated optimal charging times, supposedly around 4 minutes per retort, though they've never actually done this work themselves, so their calculations exist in theoretical space, unburdened by reality. Shovel after shovel. Your shoulders burn. Coal dust rises in clouds, mixing with the heat shimmer to create hallucinatory effects at the edges of your vision. You're breathing heavily now, sucking in air that's probably doing terrible things to your lungs. The wheelbarrow empties, and you slam the door shut, wrestling the bolts back into place while the metal is hot enough to brand your palms through the gloves. Congratulations, you've successfully fed the beast. Only another 19 retorts to go before this particular task repeats. But first, the fires. Always the fires. Beneath each retort, in brick chambers specifically designed for this purpose, external fires burn constantly to maintain those magical 2000 degrees inside. These aren't elegant parlor fires with neat coal arrangements and tidy flames. These are industrial infernos, chaotic and hungry, consuming fuel at rates that would bankrupt a household, but which the Gasworks accepts as operational costs. Your job is keeping them fed, keeping them hot, and keeping them from either dying out or raging so intensely they damage the retort structure. You crouch down to the fire door beneath retort 6, a smaller iron door, maybe 18 inches square, set into the brick at knee height. The door has a peephole with a pivoting cover, and you flip it open to assess the situation. Orange-yellow flames dance inside, licking around the retort's underside. The color tells you it's running slightly cool, maybe 1,800 degrees instead of the ideal 2,000. This is where art meets science meets please don't explode. The firebox beneath the retort is loaded with a combination of coal and coke. Yes, you burn coke to make more coke, a circular economy that makes perfect sense until you think about it too hard. The coke from previous retort cycles gets broken up and used as fuel, supplemented with coal when temperatures need boosting. It's economical and creates a certain philosophical irony. The product of yesterday's fires fuels today's fires to create tomorrow's fuel. Victorian industrial capitalism in microcosm. You open the fire door fully, and another wave of heat assaults you. The flames inside are beautiful in that terrible way that destructive forces often are writhing, dancing, consuming everything they touch. But there's a problem. You can see clinker forming. Clinker is the enemy of efficient combustion, those fused masses of ash and impurities that form when coal burns at high temperatures. It's basically industrial slag, and it blocks airflow, reduces heat transfer, and generally makes everything worse. Historians debate whether clinker management was the single greatest challenge in Victorian gasworks operations, with some arguing it consumed up to 30% of workers' time. You grab the rake, a long iron rod with a hook at the end, and thrust it into the fire. The goal is to break up clinker and pull it forward where you can remove it, all while not extinguishing the flames or letting too much cold air in. It's delicate work performed in conditions that make delicacy nearly impossible. The rake scrapes against something solid, and you work it back and forth, feeling the clinker break apart. Chunks of fused ash tumble toward the door, still glowing red-orange, and you pull them out onto the brick floor where they can cool. The rake head is glowing now, red from the heat, and you can feel warmth radiating up the iron handle despite it being 6 feet long. This is why stokers develop that distinctive lean, that slightly hunched posture from years of bending over fire doors. It's not dramatic enough to qualify as an occupational deformity that might earn you sympathy or compensation, but it's enough to guarantee your back will ache for the rest of your considerably shortened life. With the clinker cleared, you need to add fresh fuel. There's a bucket of coke chunks nearby, broken pieces from the discharge end of other retorts, sized for optimal combustion. You shovel several into the firebox, aiming for even distribution. The new coke lands on the existing flames and begins glowing within seconds, that transition from black to red to orange, happening with impressive speed. Chemistry in action, exothermic reactions releasing energy, carbon oxidizing into carbon dioxide and heat. You don't think about it in those terms, you think, fire burns coal, makes heat, keeps gas cooking, but scientists are beginning to understand the detailed mechanisms, publishing papers in journals you'll never read about processes you perform daily. Now the dampers. Each retort fire has adjustable air dampers, cast iron plates that slide to control oxygen flow. More air means hotter fire but faster fuel consumption. Less air means slower burn but potentially insufficient heat. The dampers are controlled by levers at the side of each retort setting, and you've learned to adjust them by feel and observation. Right now, with fresh coke added, you need to increase air slightly to get those new chunks burning properly. You pull the lever, hear the metallic slide of the damper opening, and check the peephole again. The flames brighten immediately, shifting from orange-yellow toward pure yellow. Perfect. This is your life for the next several hours. Move from retort to retort, checking fires, reading flame colors, raking clinker, adding fuel, adjusting dampers. It's monotonous and exhausting, requiring constant attention but rarely intellectual engagement. Your mind wanders while your body works. You think about home, about whether your wife remembered to buy bread, about your son's cough, about that pain in your side that's been getting worse, about literally anything except the fact that you're spending the best years of your life tending industrial fires in a building that might explode. A quirky bit of Gasworks wisdom. Experienced stokers claim you can predict weather by how flames behave. Steady flames mean stable pressure. Flickering flames mean a storm's coming. Whether this is atmospheric science or superstition is unclear, but you've noticed the pattern yourself. Today, the flames are steady, which is either good news or complete nonsense masquerading as occupational knowledge. You move to retort 7, check the peephole, rake the clinker, add coke, adjust the damper. The rhythm is hypnotic, almost meditative if meditation involved extreme heat and toxic fumes. Your gloves are smoking slightly, not actually on fire, just hot enough that the leather is beginning to char. You'll need new gloves soon, which means asking Walker, which means enduring a lecture about not being careless with company property, which means you'll probably just keep using these until they disintegrate. The morning stretches ahead, an endless parade of fires requiring attention. You're 40 minutes into your fire-tending rounds, working on retort 12, when you hear it a sound that makes every experienced gas worker freeze mid-motion. It's a metallic groan followed by a sharp crack, the noise of cast iron deciding it's had enough of thermal stress and company regulations. The sound comes from the far end of the building, maybe retort 3 or 4, and it's followed immediately by shouting. Doors blown on 3. You drop your rake and move toward the commotion, not running. Running in a gasworks is how you slip on coal dust or crash into equipment, but moving with purpose. Other workers are converging on the same spot, that instinctive response to industrial disaster that says maybe we can help, or maybe we just need to witness what almost happened to us. Retort 3's charging door has indeed blown, torn partially from its hinges by internal pressure that should have been impossible if everything was working correctly. A jet of superheated gas is screaming out through the gap, a horizontal lance of flame, maybe 6 feet long, blue at the core and orange at the edges. The worker who'd been standing there, a fellow named Davies, you think youngish, only a few months in, is on the ground clutching his face. The gas jet missed him. Thank whatever deity watches over underpaid labourers, but the pressure wave and heat blast knocked him backward. He's conscious, which is good, and screaming, which is also good because it means his lungs work. 2 workers are already pulling him away from the retort, while a third runs for Walker. You join the group trying to secure the door. The metal is glowing red from the escaping gas, and the temperature near the retort is absolutely murderous. One of the senior stokers, a Scottish man named McGregor who's been here longer than the building, grabs a long iron pry bar and approaches the door at an angle. Need to force it shut before the whole bloody thing catches, he shouts over the roaring gas jet. This is delicate work. Force the door wrong, and you might snap the remaining hinge, making the situation catastrophically worse. Force it right, and you might trap the pressure inside, potentially rupturing the retort entirely. McGregor seems to understand these options and has decided to gamble on door forcing. He wedges the pry bar against the twisted door and heaves. The metal screams but doesn't move. Another worker, you recognize him as Thomas. A giant of a man with arms like tree trunks grabs the bar alongside McGregor, and together they put their weight into it. The door shifts. The gas jet wavers. And then, with a bone-jarring clang, the door slams shut, cutting off the flame. The sudden silence is almost as shocking as the noise was. McGregor and Thomas hold the door shut while you and another worker frantically work the bolts, securing it before internal pressure can blow it open again. The metal is hot enough that even through gloves your hands are burning, but you get the bolts tight. Walker arrives, clipboard abandoned somewhere, actually moving at speed for once. "What happened?" he demands, as if one of you deliberately engineered this near disaster for entertainment. Pressure surge. McGregor pants, stepping back from the retort. His eyebrows are singed, you notice. Small price. Door seal must have failed. Need to shut down this retort and check the whole bank. Walker looks like he's going to argue shutting down retorts costs production. And production is sacred, but even he can see this is non-negotiable. Right. Shut it down. Someone fetch Perkins from engineering. He turns to Davies, who's being helped to sit against the wall. "You. Can you see?" Davies nods, lowering his hands from his face. His skin is red, like a bad sunburn, but his eyes are intact. Incredibly lucky. A direct hit from that gas jet would have melted his face off. A fate several Gasworks employees discover every year across London's various works. The company maintains that modern safety protocols prevent such accidents, while simultaneously fighting legislation that would require better door seals and pressure monitoring equipment. "Get back to work, the rest of you," Walker snaps, reasserting authority now that the immediate crisis has passed. "And someone clean up this mess." The mess consists of coal dust disturbed by the commotion and Davies's lunch tin, which got knocked over and spilled. Hardly apocalyptic, but Walker needs to feel in control of something. You return to your fire-tending rounds, though your hands are shaking slightly. That could have been you. Any day, any shift, any moment, wrong place, wrong time, wrong door seal, and suddenly you're blind or dead or permanently disfigured. You're working on retort 15, maybe 90 minutes later, when the next incident occurs. This one is quieter, but potentially more insidious. A pipe joint in the gas collection system, the network of pipes that draws gas from each retort and channels it toward the purification chambers, develops a leak. You hear it before you see it. A thin, high-pitched hissing like an angry snake. Gas escaping under pressure makes distinctive sounds depending on leak size and pressure differential, and historians still argue whether experienced workers could actually diagnose leak severity by sound alone, or whether this was another case of occupational folklore dressed as expertise. The leak is small, maybe a pinhole failure in the joint sealant, but any gas leak is serious. The gas being produced in these retorts is coal gas, primarily hydrogen and carbon monoxide, both highly flammable and the latter extremely toxic. Carbon monoxide is the silent killer, colorless and odorless except for the other compounds it comes mixed with. You can breathe it for minutes before realizing something's wrong, and by then your blood oxygen is plummeting and you're stumbling toward unconsciousness. You spot the leak, a thin stream of gas whistling from a joint about 8 feet up, and immediately start looking for the fitters. These are the skilled craftsmen who handle pipe repairs, men who command double your wages because they have actual training and tools beyond shovel and rake. You spot one across the building and wave him over, pointing at the leak. The fitter, whose name you've never learned because class hierarchies extend even to first-name familiarity, squints at the joint and nods. Right. Need to isolate this section. He produces a wrench from his tool belt that's probably worth more than your weekly salary and starts working on a nearby valve. While this is happening, you notice one of the new labourers can't be more than 16, face still relatively clean, suggesting he started this morning stumbling near the leak. He's moving erratically, one hand on the wall for support. You recognise the signs immediately. Carbon monoxide poisoning. The kid's been standing too close to that leak for too long, breathing in poison with every lungful. You cross to him quickly. "Oi lad, outside, now." He looks at you with confused eyes. "Feel sick," he mumbles, dizzy. "I know. That's the gas. Come on." You grab his arm and start steering him toward the door. He's unsteady, leaning heavily on you, and you're both stumbling toward fresh air. Another worker sees what's happening and moves to help, taking the kid's other arm. You get him outside, into the pre-dawn air. It's barely 6 o'clock. Sunrise still an hour away, but the air out here is paradise compared to inside. The kid immediately bends over and vomits, his body's natural response to poisoning. Lovely. You hold his shoulders while he empties his stomach, making sure he doesn't collapse face first into his own sick. "First day?" you ask when he's finished retching. He nods weakly, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. "Welcome to the Gasworks. Try not to stand near leaks." Walker appears again with his clipboard, because of course he does, and assigns you to purification chamber duty for the next 2 hours. This is presented as a rotation, as if variety in your suffering somehow makes it better. "Need someone to check the condensers and help with the scrubbers," he announces. "You've got experience down there." Experience is a generous term for has descended into that chemical hellscape and survived. But you nod, because arguing with Walker is like arguing with the weather, pointless and exhausting. You hand off your fire-tending duties to another worker and head toward the stairs that lead down into the bowels of the gasworks where chemistry happens whether you understand it or not. The purification chambers occupy the level below the retort house, a subterranean maze of cast iron pipes, brick chambers, and chemical processes that would horrify anyone with modern safety sensibilities. The stairs descend into increasing gloom. The gas lamps down here are spaced farther apart to save costs, because why would you need adequate lighting when working with toxic chemicals? The temperature drops as you descend, which should be a relief after the retort house inferno, but somehow feels more ominous. Cold and chemical don't combine to create refreshing. The smell hits you halfway down the stairs. It's that distinctive rotten egg reek of hydrogen sulfide mixed with ammonia, coal, tar, benzene, and various other compounds that are slowly being identified and named by chemists who don't have to breathe them daily. Your nose rebels, your throat constricts, and your eyes water. This is normal. This is fine. This is Victorian industrial progress. The purification chambers exist because raw coal gas is spectacularly impure. What comes off the retorts is a mixture of hydrogen, methane, carbon monoxide, the useful stuff, along with coal tar, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and various other chemicals that range from problematic to actively poisonous. If you pumped this raw gas straight to customers' lamps, those lamps would sputter, smoke, stink, and probably poison people. So the gas needs cleaning, and cleaning happens down here in this chemical catacomb. The first stop on any purification tour is the condensers. These are massive cast iron pipes, maybe 2 feet in diameter, arranged in long horizontal runs and slightly tilted. The hot gas from the retorts gets pumped through these pipes, and as it cools, various compounds condense out primarily coal, tar, and ammonia liquor, which collect at the low points and drain into collection tanks. It's elegant in principle, temperature differential causing phase changes that separate complex mixtures. In practice, it's a nightmare of sticky, toxic residue that constantly needs maintenance. You find Jessup, the senior purification worker, standing next to one of the condensers with a wrench and a look of deep resignation. Jessup is maybe 40 but looks 60, his face permanently stained with chemical exposure that no amount of washing can remove. He's been down here 7 years, which makes him either incredibly resilient or completely insane. Historians still argue whether extended exposure to coal gas byproducts caused long-term neurological effects in Gasworks employees, with Victorian medical literature offering contradictory opinions ranging from perfectly safe to explains a great deal. "Drain's blocked again," Jessup announces without preamble. "Need help clearing it." The drain in question is at the low point of one condenser run, where coal tar should be flowing into a collection tank, but instead is backing up because something probably solidified tar is blocking the pipe. This is remarkably common because coal tar is a complex mixture of aromatic hydrocarbons that has all the flow properties of warm treacle. Except it's toxic and will give you chemical burns if it touches skin. You and Jessup approach the drain valve, which is coated in black tar residue that gleams dully in the lamplight. The goal is to open the valve, clear the blockage, and get tar flowing again without creating a massive spill or exposing yourself to more chemicals than absolutely necessary. It's a low bar, that second goal. Jessup fits his wrench to the valve and starts turning. The valve doesn't want to move surprise because tar has seeped into the threads and basically glued everything together. He puts his weight into it, muscles straining. face going red with effort. The valve shrieks and reluctantly begins turning. A trickle of tar emerges, thick and black and evil-smelling. "That's not enough flow," Jessup mutters. "Blockage must be further up." He looks at you. "Someone's got to rod it." Rodding a drain means taking a long iron rod and physically pushing it through the pipe to break up whatever's blocking it. It's exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. The rod is leaning against the wall nearby, maybe 8 feet long, one end vaguely pointed. You grab it without enthusiasm. The drain opening is about 6 inches across, and you guide the rod into it, feeling for resistance. About 2 feet in, you hit something solid. This is the blockage solidified tar that's cooled enough to form a plug. You push harder, using your body weight, and feel something give. A gout of liquefied tar suddenly pours from the drain, splashing onto the brick floor and narrowly missing your boots. The smell intensifies dramatically, that coal tar reek that's somehow both sweet and nauseating. "There we go," Jessup says with satisfaction, as if this minor victory against entropy deserves celebration. He adjusts the valve to control the flow, and tar begins running steadily into the collection tank. Job done. You've successfully unplugged a drain in a Victorian gasworks. Your mother would be so proud. The tar itself is collected and sold. It's a valuable byproduct used for everything from waterproofing to medicinal purposes. Victorian doctors prescribed coal tar derivatives for skin conditions, blissfully unaware they were basically telling patients to smear industrial waste on themselves. Some of those treatments actually worked, which says interesting things about accidental pharmacology. Next stop, the scrubbers. These are tall vertical columns, maybe 15 feet high, filled with wood slats arranged to create maximum surface area. The gas flows up through these columns while water trickles down, and the two mixing causes more impurities to dissolve out. The scrubbers are supposed to remove ammonia primarily, along with remaining hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide. It's absorption chemistry happening at scale, and it works reasonably well if you ignore the fact that the water coming out the bottom is toxic and gets dumped into the Thames. You climb a ladder to check the water distribution at the top of one scrubber. The ladder is wet and slippery from condensation and escaped scrubbing liquor because workplace safety continues to be more suggestion than requirement. At the top, you check that water is flowing evenly across the distribution plate. It is, more or less, which means this particular piece of equipment is functioning within acceptable parameters. The gas flowing through these chambers is still toxic, cleaned, but not safe. You can taste it at the back of your throat, that metallic tang of carbon monoxide and various organics. Every breath is adding to your body burden of industrial chemicals, slowly accumulating in tissues that don't have a good mechanism for clearing this stuff. But you need the wages, and the company needs the labor, so everyone pretends this arrangement is sustainable. Down here in the purification chambers, surrounded by chemistry you only barely understand, you're struck by the sheer audacity of Victorian industrial engineering building systems, this complex, this toxic, this dangerous, and then filling them with poorly trained workers earning poverty wages. It's impressive and horrifying in equal measure. Jessup dismisses you after another hour of chemical wrestling, sending you back up the stairs with a pat on the shoulder that probably transfers tar residue to your already ruined shirt. "Tell Walker the condensers are flowing," he says, "and tell him we need more lime for the scrubbers." Not that he'll listen. You emerge from the purification chambers into the retort house, and even that inferno feels like fresh air compared to the chemical soup below. Your eyes adjust to the brighter light. Your lungs attempt to process atmosphere that's merely toxic rather than aggressively poisonous. And you find Walker consulting his clipboard near retort 9. You deliver Jessup's message, and Walker makes a note without looking up. "Right, need you topside. Gasometer inspection. Numbers 2 and 4 need their water levels checked, and someone's got to verify the guide frames aren't binding." He says this like it's a perfectly reasonable request, and not an assignment that involves climbing. Several stories of iron framework in the dark. Well, it's approaching 7 o'clock now, so there's a bit of pre-dawn glow happening. Small mercies. The gasometers are visible from anywhere in the works, massive cylindrical structures that dominate the skyline like industrial cathedrals. They're the most visually striking part of the entire operation, those telescoping iron drums rising and falling with the breathing of London's gas consumption, each one capable of holding hundreds of thousands of cubic feet of gas. The gasometers at Beckton are particularly impressive, some of them reaching over 150 feet tall when fully extended. They're feats of Victorian engineering that tourists occasionally come to gawk at, because apparently some people consider massive toxic storage containers worthy of sightseeing. You head outside through the side door, and the temperature drops immediately. It's November, and the morning air has that bone-penetrating damp cold that London does so well. Your sweat-soaked shirt turns instantly clammy against your skin, and you suppress a shiver. The walk to the gasometer field takes maybe 5 minutes, following a path of crushed slag between various buildings and pipe runs. The works is beginning to wake up fully now, more workers arriving for the 7 o'clock shift change. A coal barge being manoeuvred into the canal basin, steam whistles marking various operational milestones. Gasometer number 2 looms ahead, currently sitting about halfway extended, which means it's holding perhaps 50% of its capacity. The structure is essentially a massive cylinder made of riveted iron plates, painted in that distinctive Victorian Gasworks dark green that's supposed to be dignified but mostly just looks industrial. The cylinder sits in a circular water-filled tank, and here's the clever bit. The whole thing is water-sealed. The bottom edge of the cylinder sits submerged in the water, creating an airtight seal that allows the cylinder to rise and fall with changing gas pressure while preventing leaks. It's brilliantly simple engineering that's probably saved countless lives by preventing explosive gas accumulation. The gasometer rises and falls on vertical guide frames, cast iron columns that keep the cylinder moving straight up and down rather than tilting or jamming. Your job is to climb these frames, inspect the guide wheels that run along them, check for binding or damage, and verify the water level in the tank is adequate. It's not particularly difficult work, just moderately terrifying because you'll be climbing external scaffolding on a structure filled with highly flammable gas. You approach the access ladder, a series of iron rungs welded to the guide frame, stretching upward into the gloomy morning. The ladder is wet from condensation and probably algae growth, because maintenance on non-critical items is always deferred. You test the first rung with your weight, find it solid, and start climbing. Your arms are already tired from hours of shoveling and raking, and your hands are sore from various burns and scrapes. But complaining would require having someone who cares, so you just climb. 10 feet up, 20. The ground begins to look appropriately distant. That height where falling would certainly injure you and probably kill you depending on how you landed. The company insists that safety lines are available for high work, but nobody actually uses them because they're cumbersome, and Walker has made it clear that stopping to rig safety equipment is wasting time. Victorian workplace safety in action. Theoretically concerned, practically negligent. 30 feet. 40. You pause to catch your breath, clinging to the ladder with one arm while the other gets a brief rest. From up here, you can see across most of the gasworks the retort houses, the purification buildings, the coal yards, the canal, all laid out like an industrial map of Victorian ambition. Smoke rises from various stacks, steam vents from pipes, and the whole complex has that organized chaos feeling of a system that's barely controlled but functionally operational. Historians still argue whether Victorian gasworks were engineering marvels or industrial catastrophes waiting to happen, with some scholars pointing to their remarkable efficiency and others noting the death and injury rates. Both perspectives have merit. You can be impressed by the engineering while also acknowledging that building massive explosive gas storage next to densely populated neighborhoods was maybe not optimal urban planning. 50 feet. You're level with the top of the gasometer cylinder now, which is both impressive and slightly nauseating. The cylinder's top is a flat iron dome with a central vent, and you can see it imperceptibly rising gas pressure from continuous production, pushing it upward millimeter by millimeter. It's like watching a mechanical creature breathe, this slow inhalation of flammable atmosphere. You traverse along the framework to reach the guide wheels, which are cast iron wheels about 2 feet in diameter that run in channels on the guide frames. Your job is to visually inspect them for wear, cracks, or binding. You lean in close, one hand gripping the frame, while the other shields your eyes from the wind that's picking up at this height. The wheels look acceptable, some wear on the bearing surfaces, but nothing catastrophic. A quirky bit of gasometer lore. Workers claim you can hear the gasometer singing when it's about to stick, a peculiar creaking that supposedly predicts mechanical problems. Whether this is useful acoustic monitoring or superstition remains debated. The water level check requires leaning out over the tank edge to see the measurement gauge, a vertical ruler mounted on the tank wall. You edge along the framework until you can see down into the tank. The water is about 18 inches deep, dark, and oily looking from contamination. 18 inches is within specifications, which means this particular inspection point gets a mental check mark. You're about to start your descent when you notice something that makes your stomach drop. One of the guide frame bolts is working loose. It's not catastrophic yet, but the bolt head is backed out maybe half an inch from where it should be flush against the bracket. This is how disasters start, small mechanical failures that go unnoticed until suddenly the whole system fails spectacularly. You make a mental note to tell Walker, though whether he'll authorize repair time is another question entirely. You climb down the gasometer ladder with legs that feel like they're made of wet rope, each rung requiring conscious effort to trust your grip. By the time your boots hit solid ground, your hands are cramping and your shoulders are staging a formal protest. You head back toward the retort house to report the loose bolt situation to Walker, but you're intercepted by the 9 o'clock whistle. A steam-powered shriek that announces the morning tea break with all the subtlety of a train collision. Tea break. 15 glorious minutes where you're not actively risking your life or destroying your body. Well, you're still destroying your body through accumulated chemical exposure, and the tea is probably laced with coal dust, but at least you get to sit down. Workers are already streaming toward the mess shed from various parts of the works, a sooty parade of humanity bound together by exhaustion and the desperate need for lukewarm beverages. The mess shed sits on the edge of the main yard, a wooden structure that was probably painted once, decades ago, before industrial grime claimed it as permanent territory. It's maybe 40 feet long and 20 wide, with benches along the walls and a few rickety tables in the middle. The roof leaks when it rains, the floor is packed, dirt turned to mud by countless boots, and the whole place smells like old food, wet wool, and despair. It's home, basically, for these 15 minutes at least. You push through the door and join the crowd of workers already claiming seats. Everyone looks uniformly, terrible faces, black with coal dust, except for the streaks where sweat has run, clothes stiff with grime, hands bearing various cuts and burns at different stages of healing. It's like a photography exhibition titled Industrial Revolution. The human cost, except nobody's taking pictures, because cameras are expensive and you're all too poor and too tired to care about documentation. The tea comes from a massive iron kettle that sits on a small coal-fired stove in the corner. The kettle is tended by Mrs. Fowler, a widow who's worked here longer than anyone can remember, brewing tea for workers who might not survive to drink tomorrow's batch. She's a fixture, a human institution, and she knows everyone's preferences, though preferences is perhaps too elegant a word for how much sugar can you afford to bring. You grab a tin cup from the stack. These are communal cups, shared among dozens of men, never properly washed, just rinsed occasionally when someone remembers. The Victorian understanding of germ theory is still evolving, and even the scientists who figured out that microorganisms cause disease haven't quite convinced industry that maybe sharing unwashed cups is suboptimal. You'd worry about it more if you weren't already breathing coal dust and chemical fumes 8 hours into a 12-hour shift. Mrs. Fowler ladles tea into your cup, the liquid somewhere between brown and black, with an oily film on top that's probably coal dust but might be the tea's natural state. You've stopped asking questions. The tea is hot, contains some amount of actual tea leaves, and represents a break from labour. These are its virtues. Heard Davies took a door blast this morning, Mrs. Fowler says conversationally, as if workplace accidents are gossip rather than tragedy. Face burned? Could have been worse, you reply, which is the standard response to everything in the gasworks. Lost a finger? Could have been worse. Could have lost the hand. Blinded in one eye? Could have been worse. Could have lost both. Dead? Well, At least you're not suffering anymore, which is technically true but philosophically questionable. You find a spot on one of the benches next to Jack, who's already halfway through his tea and looks even more exhausted than you feel, which is saying something. Retorts treating you well? He asks with heavy sarcasm. Lovely, like a holiday, if holidays involve constant risk of incineration. You sip the tea. It tastes like hot water that briefly considered becoming tea before giving up halfway through. Had to unblock a tar drain in purification. Jessup sends his regards. Jack grimaces. Rather you than me. That chemical hellhole makes the retort house look pleasant. He pulls out a chunk of bread from his pocket hard enough to qualify as a weapon and starts gnawing on it with the determination of a man who's paid for calories and intends to extract them regardless of bread's structural integrity. The mess shed fills up over the next few minutes, workers arriving in groups, grabbing tea, claiming seats. The noise level rises, conversations overlapping, jokes being traded, complaints being aired to an audience that shares them but can't fix them. There's something almost companionable about it, this gathering of men who've been forged into temporary brotherhood through shared misery. Tommy from the retort house is holding court near the stove, regaling a small audience with a story about a supervisor at his previous works who allegedly fell into a tar pit and emerged speaking French, which is obviously fabricated but gets laughs anyway. Humor in the gasworks tends toward the absurd because the reality is already so grim that straightforward jokes can't compete. A younger worker, you recognize him as the kid who nearly got carbon monoxide poisoning earlier, sits alone in the corner, looking green around the gills and probably questioning every life choice that led to this moment. Someone should tell him it gets better, but that would be lying. It gets familiar, which is different. You adjust to the danger, the exhaustion, the constant low-level poisoning, the way humans can apparently adjust to anything given sufficient economic necessity. McGregor, the Scottish stoker who helped close the blown door earlier, drops onto the bench across from you with a grunt. His eyebrows are indeed singed, giving him a permanently surprised expression. Heard engineering's coming to inspect that retort later, he says. Perkins himself, supposedly. Perkins? Jack perks up. The chief engineer? Must be serious then. Or they want to blame someone, you offer cynically. Always need a scapegoat when things go wrong. Aye, that's the truth. McGregor sips his tea and makes a face. Christ, this is awful, even by our standards. Mrs. Fowler's doing her best with what she's got, you say, though you're not sure why you're defending tea that tastes like industrial runoff. Loyalty to the institution, perhaps, or just automatic contradiction of complaints, since complaining is your prerogative. The conversation drifts to the usual topics. Wages, insufficient, hours, too long, management, incompetent, and the general unfairness of existence. It's cathartic in that working-class way, where voicing grievances to people who can't fix them somehow makes bearing them slightly more tolerable. Historians still argue whether workers' tea break conversations constituted early labour organising, or were simply pressure release valves that prevented actual organising, with evidence supporting both interpretations. The 15 minutes evaporate faster than gasoline in summer. The whistle blows again, announcing the end of break, and the collective groan that rises from the assembled workers could probably power a small locomotive. Bodies rise reluctantly from benches, cups get set down wherever convenient, and the march back to various industrial hells resumes. You drain the last of your tea, grimace at the sediment at the bottom, and stand. Your brief rest has somehow made your muscles more aware of their complaints. 5 more hours until dinner break. You can do this. You've done it before. You'll do it tomorrow. Probably. Back in the retort house, Walker intercepts you before you can return to fire-tending duties. Need you with the fitters for the next few hours, he announces, checking his clipboard as if it contains sacred text rather than a list of who's suffering where. They're doing leak detection on the distribution mains, and Henderson wants an extra pair of hands. Henderson is the head fitter, a man who exists in that strange middle space between worker and management, skilled enough to command respect and wages that would make you weep with envy, but still working with his hands rather than a clipboard. The fitters are the aristocracy of gasworks labour, the men who actually understand how the pipe systems work, who can read engineering drawings, who possess tools beyond shovel and pray nothing explodes. You've exchanged perhaps 10 words with Henderson in 3 years, which gives you a sense of the social stratification at play. You find him near the gas collection manifolds, a maze of cast iron pipes that gather gas from all 20 retorts and channel it toward the purification chambers and beyond. He's consulting a set of drawings spread across a makeshift table. His finger-tracing pipe runs while a younger fitter apprentice probably watches with the reverence of someone learning actual skills rather than just how to shovel faster. "You the extra hand Walker promised?" Henderson asks without looking up. His voice is educated working class, that accent which suggests he attended school past age 12 and maybe even reads newspapers. "That's me, 247. "Right, we've got a leak somewhere in the secondary distribution line. Can't pinpoint it from pressure readings alone, so we're walking the whole run." He finally looks up, assessing you with the experienced eye of someone determining whether you'll be useful or just another body taking up space. Whatever he sees must be acceptable because he nods. "Ever done leak detection?" "No, sir." "Don't call me sir. I work for a living." It's an old joke, that distinction between working class and managerial class forms of address, but Henderson delivers it without smiling. Leak detection is simple in concept, tedious in execution. Gas escaping under pressure makes noise, but not always loud enough to hear over this bloody racket. He gestures at the surrounding industrial symphony. "We use soap solution on suspected joints leaks blow bubbles. For smaller leaks we use flame testing." Flame testing. That sounds exactly as safe as it probably isn't. Flame testing meaning small candle flame near the joint. If there's gas leaking, the flame changes color or gets pulled toward the leak. Yellow-orange becomes blue-green, for instance, from the hydrogen content. It's perfectly safe if you're careful and the leak is small. If the leak is large, well, you'll know immediately because everything explodes. Henderson says this completely deadpan, and you can't tell if he's joking or if this is just what qualifies as acceptable risk in 1,880 seconds industrial practice. The apprentice fitter hands you a bucket wooden, sloshing with soapy water that smells faintly of lye and a brush, the kind you might use for whitewashing a fence if your life had taken different turns. Henderson collects a candle lamp, a small brass affair with a glass shield designed to protect the flame while still allowing it to function as a gas detector. The three of you set off along the pipe runs, tracking the secondary distribution line as it snakes through the works. The pipes are 6 inches in diameter, cast iron painted black with tar for corrosion resistance, supported every 10 feet or so by iron brackets bolted to brick walls or freestanding frames. They're joined by flanges, circular plates bolted together with a gasket in between to create a seal. In theory, these joints are airtight. In practice, gaskets degrade, bolts work loose, and thermal expansion causes everything to shift slightly, creating opportunities for gas to escape. Henderson stops at the first joint, maybe 20 feet from where you started. "Right, paint it." You dip the brush in the soap solution and slather it across the joint, covering the flange and the gap where the 2 pipe sections meet. The soap sits there, glistening wetly, and you all watch with the intensity of people whose lives might depend on whether bubbles appear. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. "Clean," Henderson announces. "Next one." You move to the next joint. Paint. Watch. Nothing. The process is exactly as tedious as Henderson promised, and you're only 2 joints into what's probably a run of several hundred connections. This is going to be a long morning. Joint 5 shows something interesting. You paint the soap across the flange, and immediately small bubbles start forming at one point, around the 7 o'clock position if the flange were a clock face. The bubbles grow slowly, fat and glistening, proof that pressurized gas is finding a path through the seal. "There we are," Henderson says with satisfaction. He produces a piece of chalk from his pocket and marks a large X on the pipe next to the joint. "Small leak won't cause immediate problems, but it'll get worse. We'll come back with tools and retighten the bolts, maybe replace the gasket if it's degraded." "How do you know it won't cause immediate problems?" You ask, because the bubbles look pretty immediate to you. "Experience." Henderson taps his nose. "Small leak, low pressure, lots of ventilation up here. The gas disperses before it can accumulate. Now, if this were in a confined space, or if the leak were larger, we'd shut down this section immediately and fix it now. It's all about risk assessment. Risk assessment by Victorian Gasworks standards, which is to say, risk assessment by people who think shipping nitroglycerin in passenger trains is probably fine. But Henderson has survived this long, so presumably his judgment is better than average. You continue down the line. Joint after joint, the ritual of paint and watch. Most joints are clean. A few show tiny leaks, pinprick escapes that Henderson marks but doesn't classify as urgent. The apprentice takes notes in a small book, recording joint locations and leak severity in handwriting that's surprisingly neat. Around joint 30, Henderson decides to demonstrate flame testing. This joint's been problematic before, he explains, pointing to faint chalk marks from previous inspections. Soap won't always catch very small leaks, so we confirm with flame. He opens the candle lamp's glass shield and brings the flame close to the joint, maybe 2 inches away. You hold your breath, which is probably pointless because if this goes wrong, you'll have bigger problems than oxygen deprivation. The candle flame, normally a steady yellow-orange, suddenly flickers and pulls slightly toward one spot on the joint. A thin thread of blue appears in the flame. There, Henderson says quietly. Small leak, mostly hydrogen. See how the flame color changes? That's your diagnostic. He pulls the flame away and closes the lamp shield. Mark it for repair. This one's recent, wasn't here last month. Historians still argue whether flame testing for gas leaks was recklessly dangerous or reasonably safe given Victorian technical limitations, with some scholars pointing to the relative rarity of ignition incidents and others noting that survivorship bias means the catastrophic failures aren't well documented because the witnesses died. You mark the joint with chalk, and the procession continues along the pipe run, hunting invisible dangers with soap and flame. You've been painting soap solution on joints for 2 hours when Henderson finally releases you from fitter duty. Tell Walker you're done here. We've marked 15 leaks for repair, which means I'll be back here tonight with the repair crew. He sounds neither pleased nor displeased by this prospect, just resigned to the reality that gasworks maintenance is eternal and sleep is for people with better jobs. You did all right, didn't blow anything up. Setting the bar impressively low, you reply, which earns you an almost smile from the apprentice, though Henderson's face remains professionally neutral. You find Walker near the retort house entrance, engaged in his favorite activity, looking important while holding a clipboard. Henderson's finished with me, you report. Walker consults his notes with theatrical precision. Right, laboratory needs someone to haul sample cylinders. Report to Whitmore. He pronounces Whitmore with the faint reverence reserved for people who wear collars to work and don't get their hands dirty. The laboratory occupies a small brick building tucked between the retort house and the purification chambers, positioned strategically where it can access gas samples from various stages of production. It's painted white, actually, white, not white 20 years ago, and now industrial grey, which immediately marks it as special territory where different rules apply. You approach the door with the wariness of someone entering alien terrain and knock before entering because laboratories apparently require such formalities. Come in, calls a voice from inside, and you push through the door into a space that might as well exist in a different century than the industrial hell surrounding it. The laboratory is clean, genuinely, impossibly clean. The floor is swept, the windows allow actual sunlight to enter, and the air smells like chemicals in that deliberate scientific way, rather than the accidental poisoning way. Wooden workbenches line the walls, covered with equipment you recognize as scientific, but couldn't name if your life depended on it. Glass tubes and beakers, brass instruments with dials, burners producing neat blue flames under various vessels. Whitmore stands at one of the benches, bent over something involving graduated cylinders and a notebook. He's maybe 30, thin to the point of suggesting he forgets to eat, and wearing wire-rimmed spectacles that have slipped down his nose in that universal posture of people concentrating on measurements. His collar is actually white. You didn't know cloth could still achieve that color after spending any time in the gasworks. His waistcoat is buttoned properly, his shirt sleeves are rolled up with neat, even folds, and he has the air of someone who attended university and occasionally remembers Latin declensions. "Ah, you must be the assistant," Walker promised. Whitmore looks up, blinking as his eyes adjust to focus beyond reading distance. "Excellent. I need gas samples collected from various production stages for quality analysis. Are you familiar with sample collection procedures?" "No, sir." "Splendid. I'll explain as we go." Whitmore sets down his pen with the careful precision of someone who treats writing instruments like they matter. Gas quality control is essential to the company's reputation. We test for calorific value, essentially how much heat the gas produces when burned, as well as for impurities that might affect lamp performance or pose health risks. He says health risks like it's a theoretical concern rather than something you're breathing right now. He crosses to a cabinet and removes several metal cylinders, each about 18 inches long and 6 inches in diameter, with valves and pressure gauges attached. These are sample cylinders. We'll fill them at different collection points, then I'll analyze the contents here. He hands you 3 of the cylinders, which are heavier than they look, maybe 15 pounds each. We'll start with the raw gas from retort bank 1. Follow me. You follow Whitmore out of the laboratory's cleanliness back into the industrial reality of the gasworks. He navigates the complex with surprising confidence for someone whose hands look like they've never encountered actual manual labor. You arrive at a sample port on the main collection manifold, a small valve with a threaded connection. Whitmore produces a length of rubber tubing from his pocket and connects one end to the sample port, the other to the cylinder valve. The procedure is straightforward, he explains, adjusting his spectacles in that absent-minded way that suggests this is unconscious habit. We open the port valve slightly, allowing gas to flow through the tubing into the cylinder, which displaces the air inside. Once the cylinder is full of pure sample gas, we close both valves and disconnect. The pressurized sample remains stable for several hours, sufficient for testing. He demonstrates. Opening valves with careful quarter turns, you hear gas hissing through the tubing, and Whitmore monitors the cylinder's pressure gauge. We want approximately 2 atmospheres of pressure. Too much, and we risk cylinder failure. Too little, and we don't have adequate sample volume. The needle climbs steadily, 10 pounds per square inch, 15, 20, settling around 30. Perfect. He closes the valves, disconnects the tubing, and hands you the cylinder. Label this one. Raw gas, bank 1, 1115A. There's chalk in my pocket. You fish out the chalk and scrawl the information on the cylinder's side, your handwriting crude compared to Whitmore's neat laboratory script. The process repeats at 3 more locations. Purified gas after the condensers, gas post-scrubbing, and final distribution quality gas. By the time you return to the laboratory, you're carrying 4 cylinders and your arms are protesting the cumulative weight. Inside Whitmore's domain, he immediately begins setting up his testing apparatus. The primary test is candle power measurement, he explains, adjusting a brass instrument that resembles a lantern connected to various tubes and gauges. We burn the gas sample in a standardized burner and compare its illuminating power to a reference candle. Standard specification requires 16 candle power for domestic supply. Below that, and customers complain. Above that, and we're wasting resources. He connects one sample cylinder to his apparatus, adjusts several valves you don't understand, and lights the burner. A flame springs up, steady and blue-white. Whitmore peers at it through what appears to be a prism or lens arrangement, making small adjustments to the gas flow. Fascinating. This raw gas sample shows significant sulfur content. You can see the slight yellow tinge at the flame base. That's why purification is essential. Sulfur compounds produce sulfurous acid when burned, which corrodes lamp fittings and produces noxious odors. You nod as if this means something to you beyond bad stuff needs removing. Whitmore consults a chart on the wall, performs some calculations in his notebook, and announces 16.3 candle power. Acceptable, though we're running slightly rich. I'll recommend adjusting the retort temperatures down 5%. He says this like the recommendation will be implemented rather than ignored because production targets exist and chemistry is theoretical. Do you also test for carbon monoxide? You ask, because that particular poison has been on your mind since the kid nearly passed out this morning. Whitmore's face suggests you've asked an intelligent question, which is surprising. We do, though the testing is less precise. Carbon monoxide is colorless and odorless, so we can't detect it directly. We measure total carbon content and make inferences. Historians still argue whether Victorian gas quality testing adequately addressed carbon monoxide dangers, with some evidence suggesting we systematically underestimated exposure risks. At least someone's questioning it, even if that someone is safely inside a clean laboratory rather than breathing retort house air. Whitmore keeps you in the laboratory for another 20 minutes, having you log test results in a ledger with columns for date, time, sample location, candle power, and various chemical measurements that mean nothing to you. Your handwriting looks like a drunken spider across the page, especially compared to Whitmore's elegant script in the previous entries, but he accepts it without comment. When you finally escape back into the industrial chaos, the noon whistle is already shrieking its announcement of dinner break 30 minutes, where you're expected to fuel your body for the afternoon's labor. The mess shed is even more crowded than it was at morning tea. Every bench packed with bodies, every available bit of wall space claimed by workers too exhausted to care about proper seating. The noise level is remarkable, dozens of conversations happening simultaneously, punctuated by laughter, coughing, and the occasional argument over absolutely nothing, because hunger and exhaustion make people irritable. You squeeze onto a bench next to a fellow whose name you're fairly certain is William, though you've been wrong before and are too tired to ask for confirmation. Your lunch pail sits where you left it this morning, tucked under the bench in a spot you've claimed through months of territorial habit. The pail is battered tin, dented from being dropped more times than you can count, with a wire handle that's slowly working loose from its rivets. Your wife packed it before dawn, working in darkness to avoid waking the children, assembling whatever food the household budget and pantry contents allowed. You open it with the resignation of someone who knows exactly what's inside, because variety is a luxury reserved for people with actual wages. A cold, boiled potato. 2 slices of bread, dense and dark, probably rye, mixed with whatever cheaper grain the baker cut it with. A piece of salt pork about the size of your thumb, more fat than meat, its surface gone slightly iridescent in the hours since packing. A small onion, raw. And, blessed miracle, a piece of cheese, hard yellow stuff that might be cheddar or might be whatever the cheesemonger claims is cheddar. Your wife must have managed some economizing to afford cheese this week. The thought makes your chest tight with an emotion you don't have energy to examine. This is the typical dinner for a London Gasworks labourer in the 1,880 seconds. Historians analysing working-class diets of the period note that industrial workers consumed approximately 3,000 to 4,000 calories daily to fuel their physical labour, but the quality of those calories was often abysmal, heavy on starches and fats, light on fresh vegetables and proteins. Malnutrition existed alongside adequate caloric intake, creating workers who were simultaneously fed and slowly starving of essential nutrients. You attack the potato first because it's the most filling. It's cold, obviously, and slightly waxy in texture, and you eat it without ceremony or enjoyment, just mechanical chewing and swallowing to get fuel into your system. The bread follows, so dense you have to tear it rather than bite it, and you alternate bites of bread with bits of salt pork to provide some moisture, because the bread alone would require half your water ration to choke down. Around you, other workers are consuming similar meals with similar lack of enthusiasm. Jack is gnawing on what appears to be a meat pie, though meat is probably optimistic terminology for whatever's inside that pastry. Tommy has produced a jar of pickled herring, and the smell is aggressive enough that people sitting nearby are shooting him aggrieved looks. McGregor is eating a bowl of something that might be yesterday's porridge, cold and congealed, spooning it up with the mechanical efficiency of a man who's long since stopped expecting food to be pleasant. A quirky fact about Gasworks dining. Some workers developed the habit of heating their food by holding it near the retort doors during their break. The company officially forbade this practice for safety reasons, but enforcement was inconsistent, and desperate hunger made men creative. You've seen fellows warm their dinner pails on the hot pipework, turning cold potato into slightly less cold potato and declaring it a culinary triumph. Nobody's tried it today, probably because Walker's been particularly vigilant about enforcing regulations he usually ignores. The machinery never stops. That's what strikes you most during these dinner breaks. You're sitting here, attempting to eat and rest, and all around the gasworks continues its relentless operation. The retorts keep converting coal to gas. The purification chambers keep processing that gas. The gasometers keep rising and falling with London's demand. Steam whistles punctuate the mechanical symphony. Chains clank as coal conveyors operate. Somewhere, a pressure valve releases with a hiss that could be routine maintenance or impending disaster, and you don't have the energy to investigate which. The bread is fighting you. It's so dense it's absorbing all moisture from your mouth, turning the act of eating into an endurance test. You pull out your water bottle, a ceramic jug with a cork stopper, the same jug you've carried for 3 years, and take a long drink. The water tastes like the Thames, which it is, filtered through the company's system, but still carrying that distinctive river flavour that suggests interesting organic history. London's water supply in the 1,880 seconds is dramatically better than it was 20 years earlier, thanks to reforms following cholera epidemics. But dramatically better is relative. At least you probably won't die of waterborne disease. Probably. The cheese is your reward for getting through the bread and potato. You savour it, or try to, though savour is difficult when you're exhausted and your mouth tastes like coal dust and chemical fumes. It's salty and sharp, and represents a small luxury that momentarily elevates your meal above pure subsistence. Your wife is good with the household budget, stretching shillings further than should be mathematically possible, and cheese this week means she found a bargain or skipped something herself. You make a mental note to actually tell her you appreciated it, though you'll probably forget by the time you stumble home tonight. The onion is last because it's barely food, more like a punishment you inflict on yourself because vegetables exist and your body theoretically needs them. You bite into it raw, no time or facilities for cooking, and it's aggressively onion-flavoured, making your eyes water and your sinuses clear. At least you'll smell like onion instead of just coal tar for the next few hours. Silver linings. Here they're bringing in new retorts next month. William probably announces to the general vicinity. Supposedly more efficient. German design. Aye, and we'll be the ones installing them, someone replies. On top of regular shifts, naturally. Can't have production disrupted. This sparks a round of grumbling about German engineering, management decisions, and the general unfairness of existence. It's comforting in its predictability, this communal complaint session. Historians still argue whether Victorian workers' constant griping represented genuine protest consciousness or was simply a cultural habit that served as pressure valve for frustrations that never coalesced into actual collective policies. Action. You finish your onion and pack the empty lunch pail, already thinking about the next 6 hours stretching ahead. Your stomach is full but not satisfied, fed but not nourished, which is pretty much the story of your entire working life. The machinery continues its symphony outside, never resting, never pausing, a mechanical reminder that your 30-minute dinner break is an allowance, not a right, and that the work continues whether you're ready or not. The dinner break ends with the same steam whistle that announced it, and Walker appears at the mess shed door like a harbinger of resumed suffering. Coal barge just locked in at Basin 3, he announces. Need 8 men for unloading detail. You. His finger stabs the air, selecting victims with the arbitrary precision of someone who enjoys wielding tiny amounts of power. You're the 5th you, which means the next hour, or possibly 3, will be spent hauling coal from barge to stockpile with your already exhausted muscles. The canal basin is a 5-minute walk from the mess shed, following a path of crushed slag and coal dust that crunches underfoot with every step. The Beckton Gasworks sits on the River Leyer, connected to London's canal system through a series of locks and channels that bring coal barges directly from the docks where Newcastle colliers unload their cargo. It's an elegant bit of Victorian logistics. Coal travels by ship from northern mines to London's riverside wharves, gets transferred to narrow boats, and those boats navigate the canal network directly to gasworks, breweries, factories, and anywhere else that burns fuel at industrial scale. The barge waiting at Basin 3 is a typical narrow boat, maybe 70 feet long and 7 feet wide, designed specifically for Britain's canal system, which is notoriously narrow and shallow. The boat sits low in the water, its hold loaded with perhaps 30 tons of coal, the black diamonds that fuel London's endless appetite for light. The boat's name is painted on the bow, Lady Margaret, which seems inappropriately genteel for a vessel whose purpose is hauling geological carbon. A weathered man stands at the tiller, probably the owner-operator, and a younger fellow son, hired hand, is already preparing the boat for unloading, removing canvas covers from the hold. Your unloading crew consists of 8 Gasworks labourers and the 2 men from the boat, forming a chain gang that will transfer 30 tons of coal from floating vessel to land-based stockpile through the magic of human backs and Victorian disregard for workers' long-term health. The foreman for this particular operation is a fellow named Sykes, a middle-aged man with the kind of permanent scowl that suggests life has disappointed him consistently and thoroughly. "Right, listen up," Sykes announces, though he doesn't actually wait for anyone to demonstrate listening. "Boat's loaded with best Newcastle steam coal, which means it's expensive and we're not spilling it. Standard chain operation, 4 men in the hold filling baskets, 4 men on the towpath hauling baskets to the pile. We rotate every 30 minutes so nobody dies. Questions?" Nobody has questions because the work is self-explanatory and Sykes wasn't actually inviting dialogue. You're assigned to the hold crew first, which means climbing down into the boat's interior where coal has been loaded to within a few feet of the top. The hold is essentially a rectangular wooden box, maybe 6 feet deep, now filled with black geological history. You descend a rickety ladder while Sykes barks instructions about not damaging the boat's structure, as if you're planning recreational vandalism rather than just trying to survive the next few hours. The hold is cramped, dusty, and claustrophobic. 4 men working in this space means constant awareness of shovels swinging, elbows jabbing, and the general danger of industrial work performed in tight quarters. The coal itself is sized somewhat uniformly, chunks between the size of your fist and a small melon, selected for efficient gasification. Some pieces are glossy and almost beautiful in that geological way that rocks can be, while others are matte and friable, crumbling at the edges where they've collided during transport. The baskets are woven wicker, reinforced with iron bands, with rope handles designed for carrying rather than comfort. Each basket holds maybe 50 pounds when loaded properly. And properly means enough to make the trip worthwhile, but not so much that the carrier staggers and spills. You grab a shovel from the pile of tools and start loading your first basket, working alongside Jack, Tommy, and a fellow whose name you've genuinely forgotten despite working alongside him for months. Shovel, lift, dump. Shovel, lift, dump. The coal makes satisfying chunk and rattle sounds as it lands in the basket, and coal dust rises in clouds that make breathing an adventure in sustained choking. You fill the basket to the 3/4 mark, leaving room for your partner to grip the handles, and then start on the next basket while the towpath crew hauls the first one away. The boat rocks gently with the water, and with the weight distribution shifting as coal gets removed. It's a pleasant sensation in isolation, that gentle sway, but combined with back-breaking labour and coal dust in your lungs, it loses its charm quickly. Historians still argue whether canal transportation of coal was more efficient than rail transport, with competing studies from the 1,880 seconds and 1,890 seconds, producing contradictory data based on how researchers calculated costs and what they included as infrastructure expenses. 15 minutes in, your shoulders are screaming. The shovel feels like it weighs 40 pounds, though rationally you know it's maybe 8. Every scoop of coal requires bending, lifting, pivoting, and dumping, using muscle groups that are already exhausted from 7 hours of prior labour. This is what Victorian industrial work really means, not romantic images of progress and engineering triumph, but brutal physical effort performed by bodies that are slowly being destroyed for wages that barely cover rent. A quirky bit of canal culture. Boat families often lived aboard these narrow boats, entire families occupying the tiny cabin at the stern, children growing up in a mobile world of coal dust and canal water. The younger fellow on this boat, you've now confirmed he's the operator's son. Maybe 17, probably attended school sporadically, if at all. His education consisting of practical knowledge about locks, loads, and navigating Britain's waterways. It's a different kind of poverty than yours, mobile rather than stationary, but poverty nonetheless. The baskets keep emptying upward, hauled out by the towpath crew and replaced with empty ones. The coal level in the hold drops slowly, frustratingly slowly, and you're increasingly aware that you're basically standing in a hole digging your way to ground level one shovelful at a time. It's Sisyphean, except Sisyphus only had to deal with one boulder and probably didn't have coal dust in his lungs. 30 minutes. Sykes's whistle blows. He's actually carrying a whistle like he's a sports referee, and you gratefully climb out of the hold to switch places with the towpath crew. The fresh air, even Gasworks quality fresh air, feels miraculous after the dusty confines below. The towpath work is marginally less terrible than hold work, though marginally is doing significant philosophical work in that sentence. Your job now is grabbing filled baskets as they're passed up from the hold, carrying them 30 yards to the coal stockpile, dumping them, and returning with empty baskets. It's repetitive, exhausting, and at least you're not breathing concentrated coal dust in a confined space, so there's your silver lining. You're on your fourth basket run, legs burning and back threatening to file formal grievances, when you spot him, Chief Engineer Perkins, making his afternoon rounds with the deliberate pace of someone whose salary doesn't depend on physical labor. Perkins represents a different species of Gasworks, employee university educated, salaried rather than hourly, and possessed of clean fingernails that suggest his relationship with industrial machinery is theoretical rather than intimate. He's dressed for the part, dark wool suit that probably cost more than your quarterly wages, waistcoat with a watch chain glinting gold across his stomach, and a bowler hat that's remained miraculously unsoiled by coal dust. In one hand he carries a leather-bound notebook, and from his waistcoat pocket dangles that gold watch chain connected to what's certainly an expensive timepiece. He moves through the gasworks like a naturalist studying exotic fauna, observing operations with professional interest but maintaining careful distance from actual dirt. Perkins notices you, or rather, notices a worker in his vicinity, and his attention sharpens. You there? What's the current unloading rate for Basin 3? You blink, basket in hand, coal dust coating your face, and try to formulate a response that doesn't sound like "I'm too exhausted to process questions from management." Not sure. Sir, we've been at it maybe 45 minutes? 45 minutes. Perkins consults his watch again, as if it might have opinions about coal unloading efficiency. 30 tons in 45 minutes works out to. Morrison, calculate the hourly rate. Morrison does mental mathematics, lips moving slightly. 40 tons per hour, sir. Assuming consistent performance. Below optimal. Standard specifications call for 50 tons per hour with an 8-man crew. Perkins looks at you as if you personally designed this inefficiency rather than just being a cog in its mechanism. Are the men maintaining proper rotation schedules? Perkins is accompanied by his assistant, a younger engineer named Morrison, who carries the technical drawings and does the actual note-taking while Perkins dispenses wisdom. Morrison is maybe 25, fresh from some technical college, and has that eager puppy energy of someone who still believes engineering is about elegant solutions rather than managing entropy and preventing explosions. He'll learn, or he'll flee to a less hazardous industry. Either way, you dump your basket on the stockpile and are heading back for another when Perkins's inspection route intersects your path. He's stopped near the coal conveyor mechanism, consulting his pocket watch with the focused attention of someone for whom timekeeping is a moral virtue. Morrison, note the time. 1300 hours, 15 minutes. Conveyor efficiency should be measured against yesterday's performance metrics. Morrison scribbles dutifully in his notebook, probably recording data that will be compiled into reports nobody reads before being filed in cabinets nobody opens. Sykes is managing rotation, sir. You're not about to volunteer that everyone's exhausted, that you've all been working since before dawn, that asking human bodies to move faster requires either better wages or complete disregard for long-term survival. Both seem unlikely. Perkins makes a notation in his own notebook he's apparently too important to let Morrison handle all the writing and moves on without further comment. You return to your basket hauling, though now with the added joy of knowing your work rate has been mathematically determined as substandard. Victorian management in action. Measure everything, optimize nothing, blame workers. The inspection party continues along their route, and you track their progress peripherally while hauling coal. Perkins stops at various points to check pressure gauges, examine valve settings, and generally perform the theatre of technical supervision. He's particularly interested in the gasometer guide frames, probably because of the loose bolt you reported this morning, and spends several minutes staring upward while Morrison takes notes about structural integrity and maintenance. Scheduling. A quirky fact about Victorian chief engineers. Many of them publish technical papers in journals like Engineering or the Gas World, describing innovations and improvements at their works. Whether these papers represented genuine advancement or were primarily vehicles for professional reputation building remains debated among historians of technology. Perkins himself has supposedly published something about optimal retort temperatures, though you've never read it because you're illiterate to technical journals and also too tired. The inspection rounds serve multiple purposes beyond actual engineering oversight. They're performances of authority, demonstrations that management is actively engaged in operations. They create paper trails for insurance purposes and legal liability. And they identify scapegoats when things go wrong. If you've documented that workers are performing below specification, you can blame them rather than systemic issues when accidents occur. You're hauling your 8th basket when Perkins's inspection catches someone actually violating rules. One of the older workers, a fellow named Peters, who's been here a decade and has earned the right to occasional rest, is leaning against the wall near the retort house, taking an unauthorized break to catch his breath. It's a minor infraction, the kind that usually gets ignored because everyone understands that human bodies have limits. But Perkins spots him and stops, posture straightening with the righteous energy of someone who's discovered actual wrongdoing. "You there, Peters, isn't it?" Perkins's voice carries that particular tone of disappointed authority that British upper-middle-class men have perfected over centuries of managing subordinates. Peters straightens slowly, probably considering whether his back pain is worth the confrontation. "Yes, sir." "Are you assigned to this location?" "Retort house, sir. Just stepped out for air." "Stepped out for air." Perkins repeats this as if Peters has confessed to grand larceny. "Your break ended 40 minutes ago. Company time is being wasted." Peters has no good response to this because the accusation is technically accurate, even if it ignores the reality that a 60-year-old man working in 2,000-degree heat might occasionally need 30 seconds of not actively dying. Perkins makes an elaborate notation in his book. "I'm documenting this incident. Repeated infractions will result in wage deductions or dismissal." He says this with the casual certainty of someone whose own employment is secure, whose mistakes get described as learning experiences rather than fireable offences. Morrison looks uncomfortable, which suggests he hasn't fully absorbed the class dynamics at play. Give him time. The inspection party moves on, leaving Peters to return to his retort duties and you to continue hauling coal with the added knowledge that even brief rest is monitored and judged insufficient. The Gasworks operates on the principle that human labour is infinitely extractable, that bodies can be pushed indefinitely, that exhaustion is moral failing rather than physical reality. You dump another basket on the pile. The coal keeps coming. The afternoon stretches ahead. Sykes releases you from coal detail after another hour of hauling baskets, your back screaming protests that your brain is too tired to process. "Walker needs you at the distribution station," he announces, consulting a grease-stained note. Something about pressure monitoring. The distribution station occupies its own brick building adjacent to the purification chambers, positioned where gas has completed its journey from coal to cleaned, pressurized fuel ready for London's consumption. You push through the door into a space dominated by enormous cast-iron valves, wheels the size of wagon wheels, connected to pipes that disappear into the ground, feeding the vast underground network of mains that spider beneath London's streets. 3 valve men are on duty, a specialized crew who occupy that interesting middle ground between common labor and skilled trades. They're not fitters with their tools and technical knowledge, but they're not simple stokers either. Valve men control the flow of gas from works to city, managing pressures and distribution to ensure theatres can light their stages, homes can illuminate their parlours, and street lamps can push back London's darkness. It's responsibility without much authority, which seems to be a recurring theme in Victorian employment structures. The senior valve man, a fellow named Garrett, spots you and nods. Need an extra pair of eyes on the gauge board while we do the evening pressure adjustment. Just stand there and call out readings when I ask. The gauge board is mounted on the wall like a mechanical artwork. 20 brass pressure gauges arranged in neat rows, each one connected to a different section of London's gas distribution network. The needles quiver and sway with the constantly shifting pressures as thousands of customers throughout the city light lamps, extinguish them, adjust flames, and generally consume gas at rates that vary by second. Each gauge is labelled Whitechapel Main, Stepney District, Bow Common, Stratford Branch, a geographic map of East London rendered in brass instruments and fluctuating needles. You position yourself in front of the board while Garrett approaches the main distribution valve, a monstrous iron wheel, maybe 4 feet in diameter. The wheel controls gas flow from the works storage gasometers into the primary distribution main, and adjusting it requires both strength and precision. Turn it too far and you flood the system with excess pressure, potentially rupturing weaker pipes in customers' homes. Turn it too little and gas pressure drops, lamps flicker and dim, and customers complain to the company about inadequate service. Right, Garrett announces. Evening demand is starting to climb. Families getting home, lighting their lamps for supper. We need to increase primary pressure from 16 inches to 18 inches water column. He says this like it's completely reasonable that you should understand what inches water column means as a pressure. Measurement. Historians still argue whether Victorian gas distribution networks were engineering triumphs or disasters waiting to happen, with some scholars pointing to their remarkable reliability and others noting the frequency of explosions, leaks, and poisonings that plagued urban gas systems. Both perspectives have merit. The network functions remarkably well given its complexity, but that functionality is purchased with constant vigilance and occasional catastrophic failures. Garrett grips the enormous valve wheel and begins turning it counterclockwise, the wheel squealing as metal moves against metal. Call out primary main pressure, he instructs. You find the gauge labelled primary distribution and watch the needle climb. 16 and a quarter, 16 and a half. Another valveman, younger and quiet, is stationed at a secondary valve, ready to make compensating adjustments. The third valveman monitors the gasometer levels through a window, ensuring that increased distribution doesn't drop storage below safe minimums. It's a coordinated operation, this feeding of London's gas appetite, requiring attention and experience that the company pays perhaps an extra shilling a week to secure. 17 inches, you call out. Garrett continues turning, muscles straining against the resistance. The valve is enormous, because the volumes it controls are enormous. Hundreds of thousands of cubic feet per hour flowing through these pipes to customers across the city. It's difficult to conceptualize that scale, the sheer magnitude of consumption that Victorian London represents. Every gaslit lamp in every home, every street lamp on every corner, every theatre chandelier, every factory furnace burning gas instead of coal, all of it flows through systems like this, controlled by men turning iron wheels. 17 and a half, you report. A quirky bit of valveman lore. Experienced operators claim they can feel demand changes through the valve wheel, that increased consumption creates subtle resistance differences they detect through their hands. Whether this is genuine sensory skill or occupational mythology is unclear, but Garrett has mentioned it before with complete seriousness. 18 inches, holding steady. Garrett stops turning and steps back, wiping his hands on a rag that's seen better decades. Right. Monitor that for the next 10 minutes. Make sure it stabilizes. If it drops below 17 and 3/4, call me. You stand there watching the needle quiver around the 18-inch mark, occasionally dipping to 17 and 7/8 before recovering. This is your job for the next 10 minutes, being a human alert system for a mechanical gauge, because hiring someone to literally just watch a needle is apparently more economical than installing any kind of automatic pressure regulation. Through the window, you can see one of the massive gasometers slowly descending as its stored gas gets consumed. The iron cylinder drops maybe an inch every few minutes, a visible representation of London's appetite. The gasometer will continue falling until demand decreases or until it reaches minimum level, at which point gas production from the retorts needs to exceed consumption, or customers will notice pressure drops and service degradation. The late afternoon sun is beginning its descent toward evening, and somewhere out there in London, families are gathering for supper, students are studying by gaslight, shopkeepers are illuminating their windows, theatres are preparing for evening performances. All of that domestic comfort, that taken for granted illumination, depends on systems like this, and on workers like you standing in industrial buildings watching pressure gauges while breathing toxic fumes and earning wages that barely cover rent. The needle holds steady. 18 inches. London stays lit. Garrett releases you from gauge watching duty around 3 o'clock, by which point you've been working for 11 hours straight with only those brief breaks for tea and dinner. Your body is operating on some combination of momentum, stubbornness, and the knowledge that stopping isn't an option because rent is due and your family needs to eat. Walker intercepts you because of course he does and sends you back to the retort house for the final hours of your shift. The heat hits differently now. Earlier this morning it was brutal but manageable, your body fresh enough to compensate and adapt. Now, after 11 hours of labour, the 2,000-degree furnaces feel like they're radiating directly into your skull. Your vision swims slightly at the edges, heat exhaustion making everything shimmer and waver. You're sweating, but barely. Your body has depleted whatever moisture it had to spare, and what little sweat emerges evaporates instantly in the furnace heat. This is when accidents happen. Everyone knows it, though nobody talks about it directly, because acknowledging the danger means acknowledging the system that creates it. Late afternoon in the gasworks, when men have been working since before dawn, when concentration wavers and reaction times slow, when fatigue makes fingers clumsy and judgment poor, this is when machinery claims its tribute of flesh and bone. You're assigned to retort 17 for the remaining shift, taking over from a worker who's stumbling toward the exit with the glazed expression of someone who's reached the absolute limit of human endurance. You don't know his name. You might have worked beside him for years. Right now, you can barely remember your own name through the exhaustion fog. The retort needs its fire tended, clinker raked, temperatures monitored. Simple tasks. Tasks you've performed hundreds of times. But simple becomes complicated when your hands shake and your eyes refuse to focus properly. You approach the fire door, squat down your knees, protest, your back screams, and flip open the observation port. The flames blur and multiply. You blink hard, trying to clear your vision, but the heat shimmer makes it difficult to assess the fire's condition. Is that orange-yellow or yellow-orange? Does it need more fuel or less? Your heat-addled brain struggles with decisions that should be automatic. You grab the rake, that long iron rod you've wielded all day, except now it feels impossibly heavy and your grip isn't quite right. You thrust it into the firebox to break up clinker, and the rake catches on something, probably a chunk of fused ash, and jerks in your hands. Your exhausted fingers nearly lose their grip entirely. If the rake had fallen into the fire, you'd have needed to fish it out somehow, probably burning yourself in the process. You tighten your hold and complete the raking with concentrated effort that shouldn't be necessary for such routine work. Across the retort house, you hear a sharp cry of pain. A worker at retort 9 has caught his hand on something you can't see, what from this distance, but he's clutching his left hand with his right, blood visible even through the coal dust, coating his skin. These injuries are so common they barely register as events. The worker wraps his hand in a rag from his pocket and continues working, because stopping means losing wages and nobody can afford that. Historians examining Victorian industrial accident records note a disturbing pattern. Injury rates spiked dramatically in the final hours of extended shifts, with workers in the 11th and 12th hours showing accident rates 3 to 4 times higher than workers in their first few hours. The pattern was well documented in factory inspectors' reports, yet shift lengths remained unchanged because production demands trumped worker safety. You're adding coal to the firebox when your mind simply drifts. For several seconds, or maybe longer, time is elastic. When you're this exhausted, you're not quite present. your consciousness having briefly abdicated responsibility while your body continues its automatic motions. You come back to awareness standing in front of the open fire door, shovel in hand, with no clear memory of the past minute. This is terrifying. This is how people die mental absence while surrounded by machinery that never stops, never forgives inattention. You shake your head violently, trying to restore alertness through physical action. It doesn't really work. The exhaustion is bone deep, neurological, not something you can simply push through with willpower. A conveyor belt runs near your position, carrying coal from the stockpile to the charging bay. It's a simple mechanism, canvas belt running on iron rollers, driven by a steam engine somewhere out of sight. The belt moves at walking pace, which seems safe until someone's clothing catches on it or someone reaches across it at the wrong moment. You've seen it happen. A sleeve snagged by a roller, pulling a man's arm into the machinery before anyone could react. That man lost his arm at the elbow and received exactly nothing in compensation because he'd violated safety protocols by reaching across the belt. Your eyelids are heavy, impossibly heavy. You catch yourself nodding off while standing upright, jerking awake with a start that sends adrenaline spiking through your system. Falling asleep in front of a retort furnace is how you wake up on fire or don't wake up at all. You force your eyes wide open, staring at the brick wall until the effort of focusing keeps you conscious. McGregor stumbles past, moving like he's drunk, though you know he's sober. That's just what 11 hours of physical labor in extreme heat does to human coordination. He's heading for the water barrel, probably desperate for hydration, and you watch him weave slightly as he walks. If he collapsed right now, you're not sure you'd have the energy to help him up. A quirky and grim bit of Gasworks culture, workers developed a superstition about the devil's hour, that period between 3 and 4 o'clock when fatigue peaked and accidents clustered. Some men would mutter protective phrases or touch iron for luck when that hour arrived. Whether this superstition had any basis in reality or was simply workers imposing narrative structure on random tragedy is debatable, but the clustering of afternoon accidents was statistically documented. You force yourself through the remaining tasks. Check the damper. Monitor the temperature by flame color. Add fuel when necessary. Don't fall asleep. Don't catch fire. Don't get injured. The bar for success has dropped to simply surviving the next few hours intact. Your hands are shaking now, fine tremors that make precision impossible. When you grip the shovel, your fingers don't quite close properly, and you have to consciously focus on maintaining your hold. This is dangerous. This is how accidents happen. But there's no alternative. You can't stop, can't rest, can't do anything except push forward until the shift end whistle releases you. The retort house stretches infinitely in all directions, the exit impossibly distant, time moving like cold treacle. Your mind is wandering again, slipping away from the immediate hell of retort 17 toward thoughts of home, of the world beyond these brick walls. Specifically, you're thinking about the neighborhood where you live, where everyone who works here lives. That collection of soot-blackened terraces clustered in the gasworks shadow like barnacles on a ship's hull. You can't afford to live anywhere else, and even if you could, landlords outside the immediate area won't rent to gasworks employees because everyone knows you carry the stink with you like an invisible plague. The houses in your neighborhood, calling them houses is generous, really are purpose-built workers' terraces from the 1860 seconds, constructed as cheaply as possible to accommodate the labor force that Victoria's industrial ambitions demanded. Brick walls 1 course thick, so you can hear your neighbors' conversations word for word through the structure. Roofs that leak when it rains and radiate heat when it doesn't. Single cold water taps shared among 4 families. Privies in the tiny backyards, emptied weekly by night soil men if you're lucky. The buildings are painted or were painted once, probably grey or brown, but decades of coal, smoke and chemical fallout from the works have rendered everything a uniform sooty black. Nothing grows there. That's what strikes visitors most, according to the occasional social reformer who ventures into the area, armed with notebook and moral indignation. The tiny front gardens that theoretically should contain flowers or shrubs are just bare dirt, occasionally decorated with weeds too stubborn to acknowledge they're unwelcome. The backyards where families might grow vegetables are similarly barren, the soil contaminated with decades of sulfur compounds, coal tar derivatives, and various chemicals whose names you don't know but whose effects are abundantly clear. One woman, Mrs. Patterson, 3 doors down, tried planting tomatoes last spring, tending them with optimistic determination. The plants grew maybe 6 inches before turning yellow and dying, their leaves spotted with what looked like chemical burns. She cried, which made you uncomfortable because what can you say? Sorry, the toxic fallout from my workplace murdered your tomatoes doesn't quite capture the situation. Property values in the Gasworks shadow are, predictably, abysmal. Your landlord purchased the entire terrace block for a pittance in 1875, and he'll hold it until the works closes or the buildings collapse, whichever comes first. Historians still argue whether industrialists deliberately zoned worker housing near toxic facilities to suppress property values and maintain cheap accommodation, or whether it was simply economic opportunism taking advantage of unwanted land. Either way, the result is the same. You live here because you work there, and you work there because you live here. A circular trap of geographic and economic necessity. The air quality, let's be honest, calling it air is charitable. What you breathe in your neighborhood is a toxic soup of coal smoke from domestic fires, industrial emissions from the gasworks, and whatever the Thames decides to contribute depending on tide and wind. Victorian public health reformers have started measuring air quality in various London neighbourhoods, and the areas surrounding gasworks consistently rank among the worst. One study, you heard about this from a newspaper someone left in the mess shed, found that sulfur dioxide concentrations near gasworks were 4 times the citywide average. Sulfur dioxide corrodes lungs like it corrodes metal, slowly and inexorably. Everyone has the cough, that persistent hacking that punctuates conversations and keeps families awake at night. Your youngest daughter's cough has gotten worse lately, that wet rattle that makes your chest tight with fear you can't afford to acknowledge. Everyone knows someone who got poisoned. Not the dramatic, acute poisoning where someone collapses after breathing carbon monoxide, though that happens too, but the slow, cumulative poisoning that erodes health over years. Old Mister. Henshaw, 2 streets over, worked the purification chambers for 15 years and developed tremors in his hands that eventually spread to his whole body, some kind of neurological damage from prolonged chemical exposure. He can't work anymore, can't feed himself properly, just sits in his front window shaking and staring at nothing while his wife takes in washing to support them. The company insists his condition is unrelated to work, probably hereditary or due to personal habits. Medical science can't definitively prove the connection, so the company faces no liability. Your own health isn't exactly pristine. That pain in your side that comes and goes, sometimes sharp enough to make you gasp. The persistent headaches that start mid-shift and last through the night. The way your vision occasionally blurs, even when you're not heat-exhausted. You don't see a doctor because doctors cost money, and besides, what would they say? Stop working in the gasworks isn't actionable advice when you have rent to pay and mouths to feed. The children in the neighbourhood have a pallor that's probably not normal, though you have nothing to compare it to. They're thin, everyone's thin. That's just working class life, but there's something beyond simple underfeeding. A lethargy, a lack of vitality, as if the neighbourhood's toxicity is draining their life force before they've had a chance to build it up. The infant mortality rate in your area is horrifying, though nobody collects official statistics because acknowledging the problem might require addressing it. You've lost count of the tiny coffins you've seen carried from neighbours' homes. Babies who survived birth but couldn't survive the environment they were born into. A quirky and depressing fact about gasworks neighbourhoods. Local pawn shops did thriving business in respiratory tonics, patent medicines, and lung-strengthening elixirs that were mostly alcohol, opium derivatives, and wishful thinking. Workers would pawn their Sunday clothes to buy medicine for their children, creating a cycle of debt and desperation that merchants exploited enthusiastically. The social stigma is real too. Tell someone from North London that you work at the gasworks and watch their expressions shift from polite interest to barely concealed disgust. Gasworks employees occupy a peculiar position in Victorian social hierarchy necessary for modern life, but tainted by proximity to industrial processes. It's not quite the moral stain that comes with working in slaughterhouses, but it's close. Your children get bullied at school well. At the brief periods they attend school between working part-time jobs to supplement family income with other children holding their noses and making gagging sounds, as if poverty and toxic exposure are contagious through association. Your wife never complains about the neighborhood, about the coal dust that settles on every surface despite her constant cleaning, about the way her clothes permanently smell like sulfur, about the health problems your employment inflicts on the entire family. She's practical, your wife, focused on managing the household budget and keeping everyone fed and clothed. But you've seen how she looks at the better neighborhoods when you occasionally venture west, how her eyes linger on streets with actual trees and houses with painted trim and windows that aren't permanently grey with grime. She married you knowing what your employment meant, but knowing and living with the daily reality are different things. The Gasworks dominates the neighborhood in every sense, economically, socially, environmentally, psychologically. Its stacks are visible from every street, those tall brick chimneys trailing smoke like industrial flags announcing, "Here be poison." The machinery's noise is audible even at home, a constant low rumble that never quite stops. At night, the retort house glow creates an orange corona, visible for miles, like the works is burning from within, which, technically, it is. You wonder sometimes what happens when the works eventually closes, when coal gas gets replaced by something else, electricity maybe, though that seems distant and theoretical. Will the neighborhood recover? Will plants grow again? Will the property values rise and the current residents get displaced by gentrification? Or will the contamination persist for generations, a toxic legacy left behind when industry moves on to poison somewhere else? These thoughts swirl through your exhausted brain while your hands continue their automatic work. Monitor the fire, add fuel, don't die. The personal and the environmental, the immediate and the distant future, all blurring together in your fatigue-addled consciousness. The shift end whistle is maybe 90 minutes away. You can survive 90 more minutes, probably. The 6 o'clock whistle doesn't so much announce shift change as it releases the tension that's been building for the past hour, that collective anticipation of escape that makes time move like cold molasses. You're at retort 17 when the sound pierces the industrial cacophony, and the relief is almost physical, a loosening in your chest that you didn't realize had tightened. 12 hours. You've survived 12 hours. Your body is a catalogue of complaints, burning shoulders, aching back, blistered hands, lungs that feel lined with sandpaper, but you're upright and conscious, which means today wasn't a catastrophic failure. The evening crew is already trickling in through the main doors. Men who slept while you worked, and who will now work while you attempt to sleep. They look fresh in that relative way that fresh means at a gasworks not actually energetic, but at least not actively dying yet. You recognize most of them by sight, if not by name. There's O'Brien, who works Retort Bank 2, Davies, who somehow recovered from this morning's door blast, and is apparently back for the evening shift because taking time off for minor injuries like facial burns would be sensible, and sensible doesn't pay rent, and a handful of younger workers whose names you've never learned because turnover is high and attachment seems pointless. The shift change process is theoretically organized, but practically chaotic. In theory, each outgoing worker briefs their replacement on the current status of their assigned equipment, which retorts are running hot, which valves are temperamental, which machinery is making new and concerning noises. In practice, everyone's too exhausted or too rushed to provide more than abbreviated updates, and the incoming workers are still orienting themselves to the building's heat and noise, so information transfer is minimal at best. Your replacement for Retort 17 is a fellow named Watts, middle-aged with a limp from some previous industrial accident, probably at the works, though possibly elsewhere, because Victorian London offers abundant opportunities for machinery to damage human bodies. He approaches while you're completing your final fire check, and you step aside to let him assess the situation. "How's she running?" Watts asks, the universal opening for shift handover briefings. "Hot," you reply, which is both accurate and obvious given that you're standing next to a 2,000-degree furnace. Retort's been running at good temperature all afternoon. Fire's got good fuel, damper's set to 3/4 open. Clinker's been building up faster than usual, you'll probably need to rake it out in an hour or so. Door seals are holding, no leaks that I've noticed. Watts nods, processing this information with the weary competence of someone who's done this job for years. Heard number 3 had a door blow this morning. Yeah, Davies took the blast. They've shut it down for inspection. You gesture vaguely toward retort 3, which sits dark and cold, an unusual sight in a retort house where everything is typically glowing and burning. Door blow, Watts shakes his head. Every bloody week something tries to kill us. This is true and requires no response, so you just grunt agreement. You're already mentally checking out, your consciousness beginning the transition from actively working to desperate to leave. But there are protocols, however loosely followed, and you force yourself to complete the handover properly. Watch the damper on this one, you add. It's sticky. Needs extra force to adjust, but don't force it too hard or you'll snap the linkage. Thompson did that last month on retort 9. Took them 6 hours to repair. Right. Sticky damper, careful with the force. Watts is already moving into position, claiming the space you've occupied for the past several hours, establishing his relationship with this particular piece of industrial machinery. Around you, similar briefings are happening as the outgoing shift transfers responsibility to the incoming crew. The noise level rises as conversations overlap, status updates, warnings about equipment quirks, gossip about management decisions, complaints about working conditions that everyone shares but nobody can fix. It's almost companionable, this moment where 2 shifts overlap, day workers and evening workers occupying the same space briefly before the day crew escapes into the November darkness. Walker is making his rounds with his eternal clipboard, checking that each station has coverage, marking attendance, generally performing the supervisory theatre that justifies his slightly elevated wages. He stops near you and Watts, consulting his notes. Retort 17 handover complete? Just finishing, you confirm. Right. 247. You're clear to clock out. Don't forget to return your lamp to the equipment shed. He says this like you might forget after working here for 3 years, like lamp return procedures are complex enough to require reminding. You nod and step away from retort 17, from the heat and the flames and the responsibility. Watts is already checking the fire door observation port, beginning his own relationship with the machinery, and you're officially relieved of duty. The walk toward the exit feels longer than it should, your legs heavy and uncooperative, but each step is progress toward freedom, toward fresh air, toward home. At the equipment shed, a small wooden structure near the main gates, you return the lamp you were issued this morning, hanging it on its designated hook in a row of identical lamps. The lamp keeper, an elderly man whose job consists entirely of tracking lamp distribution and return, makes a mark in his ledger. Number 247, lamp returned, 607. His voice is monotone, worn smooth by years of repeating the same phrases. The timekeeper's hut is your final stop, where you collect your metal token and have your departure officially recorded. The same process you performed 12 hours ago, but in reverse. Hodges squinting at your token, consulting his ledger, marking the time with that same flourish suggesting bureaucratic importance. 6:09, he announces. 12 hours, 14 minutes. Overtime's approved. 14 minutes of overtime. That's an extra. You're too exhausted to calculate the fractional wage increase, but it's probably measured in pennies. Still, pennies matter when you're this poor, so you'll take them without complaint. Your pay won't be distributed until Saturday. That's 2 days away, when workers line up at the pay window to collect their weekly wages in cash. 12 hours per day, 6 days per week, at whatever the current rate is for unskilled labour. After you've paid rent, bought food, covered fuel for heating, and addressed the various minor household expenses that accumulate like coal dust, there's almost nothing left. This is the economic reality of Victorian working-class life. Full-time employment that barely achieves subsistence, with no buffer for emergencies or unexpected expenses. One injury, one illness, one bout of unemployment, and the whole fragile structure collapses into destitution. But that's a problem for future you. Present you just needs to get out of this building, breathe air that isn't actively poisonous, and stumble home through London streets. You're halfway to the gates, already tasting freedom, when Walker's voice cuts through your escape fantasy like a blade through fog. 247. Where do you think you're going? You turn, suppressing the urge to explain in detail exactly where you're going and why his question is idiotic. Clocked out, sir. Shift's done. Shift's done when cleanup's done. Retort Bank 4 needs clinker clearing, and the conveyor chains haven't been oiled since yesterday. Walker brandishes his clipboard like it's a legal document proving your eternal servitude. Company policy. End of shift maintenance is part of your duties, not optional extra work. Of course, there's one more thing, one more task, one more delay between you and escape. You could argue shift technically ended at 6. You've already worked 12 hours. Surely someone from the evening crew could handle this, but arguing with Walker is like arguing with brick walls, except brick walls eventually crumble, and Walker appears to be immortal. You swallow your protests and nod. How long's this going to take? 30 minutes if you're quick about it. Walker makes a notation on his clipboard, probably recording your reluctant compliance for future reference. Thompson's already at Bank 4. Help him with the clinker, then do the conveyor maintenance. Report back when you're finished. 30 minutes. An extra 30 minutes after 12 hours of labor. This is technically unpaid. The company considers end-of-shift maintenance as part of regular duties rather than overtime-eligible work. A creative accounting fiction that saves them money and costs you time. You've long since stopped fighting these petty injustices because fighting requires energy and you're operating on fumes. Thompson is indeed at Retort Bank 4, already working on the clinker removal with the resigned efficiency of someone who's accepted that leaving on time is a myth and hope is for people with better jobs. He's using a long iron rake to pull spent clinker from the discharge ends of the retorts, the incandescent chunks tumbling into wheelbarrows that will need transporting to the ash pit. It's essential work. Clinker accumulation affects heat transfer efficiency and can eventually block the retorts entirely. But it's also brutal, hot, and exactly what you don't want to be doing at the end of a 12-hour shift. Lovely evening for clinker removal, you offer, because gallows humor is all you have left. Thompson grunts something that might be agreement or might be a curse in a language you don't speak. He's bent over his work, face illuminated by the glow from the discharge door. Sweat already soaking through his shirt despite the November chill outside. You grab a spare rake from the tool rack and approach the next retort in the bank. The discharge door is secured with heavy bolts that are, predictably, hot enough to burn through your work gloves. You wrestle them open, the metal squealing in protest, and swing the door wide. The retort interior glows deep red-orange, the spent coke still radiating tremendous heat despite being nominally finished with gas production. The air wavering from the opening makes everything shimmer like a mirage. You thrust your rake into the retort and begin pulling out clinker. The chunks are fused masses of ash, coal impurities, and whatever else doesn't gasify during the heating process. A geologist could probably identify fascinating mineral formations in this stuff, but you just see heavy, hot obstacles between you and going home. Each rakeful weighs maybe 20 pounds and requires pulling it 3 feet from the retort opening to the wheelbarrow. Your arms are already shaking with exhaustion, and you've barely started. Historians examining Victorian industrial operations note that end-of-shift maintenance tasks were often performed by the most exhausted workers at their most dangerous moment. Yet, company safety records rarely acknowledged this timing contributed to accidents. The logic was perverse. Maintenance needed doing. The outgoing shift knew the equipment from their day's work, so they should handle it regardless of fatigue levels. That this resulted in increased injury rates was documented but largely ignored. Rake, pull, dump, rake, pull, dump. The clinker makes sharp clinking sounds as it hits the wheelbarrow, and the heat radiating from the chunks is intense enough that you have to keep your face turned away. A piece of clinker catches on the retort's internal ridge, and you have to shake the rake violently to dislodge it, nearly losing your grip when it finally breaks free. "Remember Johnson?" Thompson asks without pausing his own work. "Dropped a rake load of hot clinker on his foot last month. Burned straight through his boot. Heard he's still limping. Company doctor says he's fit for duty. Thompson's tone makes clear what he thinks of the company doctor's assessment. 10 minutes of clinker removal fills 3 wheelbarrows, and your shoulders are staging a full rebellion, sending pain signals that your brain is too exhausted to properly process. The wheelbarrows need emptying at the ash pit, a brick-lined depression about 50 yards away where spent materials accumulate until they're cool enough to shovel into carts for disposal. You and Thompson take turns wheeling the barrows across the yard, dumping the still glowing clinker into the pit where it joins earlier deposits and creating a hellscape of industrial waste. The conveyor chains are your final task, oiling the mechanical linkages that keep the coal delivery system running. The conveyor itself is currently stopped, the evening shift not yet having ramped up to full production levels, which makes the work slightly less terrifying than it would be with moving machinery. You climb onto the framework with an oil can, a small brass vessel with a long spout, and begin working your way along the chain, applying oil to each joint and roller. A quirky bit of maintenance lore. Workers claimed you could predict mechanical failures by how machines sounded when properly oiled versus when they were running dry. Whether this acoustic diagnosis was reliable or superstition remains debated, but experienced workers swore by it, distinguishing between healthy mechanical sounds and unhealthy ones with confidence that seemed mystical to newcomers. The oil is thick and smells faintly of petroleum, and it gets all over your hands despite your attempts at precision. Each chain link requires attention, maybe 200 links total along this section, and you're acutely aware that if someone accidentally starts the conveyor while you're working on it, you'll be pulled into the machinery with results that would be catastrophic and probably fatal. 30 minutes becomes 45 by the time you've finished both tasks and reported back to Walker, who makes a final notation on his clipboard and releases you with all the ceremony of dismissing a servant. You're too tired to be angry about the extra unpaid time. You're too tired for most emotions beyond a general desire to stop existing vertically. The clock at the timekeeper's hut reads 6:52 when you finally actually genuinely leave the gasworks. The walk home begins like it always does, one foot in front of the other, your body moving on autopilot while your consciousness drifts somewhere between exhaustion and relief. The gasworks gates close behind you with a metallic clang that sounds like freedom, or at least like temporary parole from industrial purgatory. The November evening has settled into full darkness now, nearly 7 o'clock, and London's gas lamps are glowing along the streets, each one a small monument to the labour you've just completed. Somewhere, gas you helped produce is flowing through pipes beneath your feet, lighting those very lamps, an irony you're too tired to appreciate. The fog has thickened since morning. Proper London fog that isn't quite rain but isn't quite air either. Just moisture suspended in coal smoke and river vapour, creating that signature grey-yellow murk that makes navigation difficult and breathing inadvisable. The street lamps create halos of diffused light, glowing spheres floating in the darkness like captured moons. You navigate more by memory than by vision, following a route you've walked hundreds of times, your feet knowing the way even when your eyes can't quite process distance or direction. Your clothes are completely saturated with the day's labour, coal dust ground into every fibre, coal tar creating stiff patches on your shirt and trousers, and that distinctive gasworks smell that's part sulphur, part ammonia, part something chemical and indefinable that announces your occupation to anyone within 20 feet. You reek. Objectively, comprehensively reek. Your wife will make you strip in the tiny entry passage, before allowing you further into the house, will take your clothes and attempt to wash them in cold water with soap that can't quite overcome industrial contamination. The clothes will never be truly clean again, just marginally less filthy. A temporary state that will last until tomorrow morning when you put them on again and return to the works. Your lunch pail swings from your hand, empty now except for the residual smell of onion and the metal tang of the tin itself. Your body is a symphony of discomfort, shoulders burning from hours of shoveling, back aching from bending over fire doors, hands blistered and cut from various encounters with hot metal and rough tools, lungs protesting every breath as if they're considering going on strike. Your throat is raw, scratchy from 12 hours of breathing coal dust and chemical fumes. You cough, that deep rattling cough that produces dark phlegm, You try not to examine too closely because knowing what you're coughing up would require acknowledging what you're breathing in. The streets are busier now than they were at 4 in the morning, evening foot traffic mixing with workers from other industries making their own exhausted journeys home. You pass a group of dock workers, identifiable by their distinctive clothing and the way they move, different aches from different labor, but the same fundamental exhaustion. A woman is selling baked potatoes from a cart, the steam rising from her brazier, looking impossibly inviting in the cold evening. You have no money for potatoes, won't have money until Saturday's pay, so you just keep walking. Your route takes you along the canal for a stretch, that same waterway that brings coal barges to the works. The water is black and still, reflecting the gas lamps in wavering lines of light. Something splashes in the darkness, rat, probably, or debris falling from the towpath. The canal smells like industrial waste and Thames backwash, which is to say it smells like London's underside, all the things the city produces but prefers not to acknowledge. You're maybe 15 minutes into your walk when you realize your vision is blurring again, not from heat exhaustion this time, but from simple fatigue. Your body wants to shut down, wants to stop moving and collapse wherever you happen to be standing. You force yourself forward through sheer stubborn necessity. Home is still a 20-minute walk away, and stopping in the middle of East London at night is how you wake up robbed or wake up not at all. A horse-drawn omnibus passes, lamps glowing from its interior, passengers visible through the windows like creatures in an aquarium. They're probably heading home from clerking jobs or shop work, positions that don't destroy bodies quite as thoroughly as industrial labor. You feel a brief spike of resentment. They get to sit. They're probably clean. They definitely don't smell like coal tar, but the emotion is too exhausting to sustain, so it fades as quickly as it arose. Historians examining Victorian working-class life note that the daily commute, though short by modern standards, represented significant additional physical burden for labourers who'd already worked 12-hour shifts. The walk home wasn't rest or recovery time, it was additional unpaid labour, miles walked on exhausted legs, extending the workday's damage while providing no compensation. The streets of your neighbourhood appear gradually from the fog, familiar in their grimness. The same terraced houses with the same sooty bricks, the same narrow passages between buildings, the same smell of coal fires and poverty and resigned desperation. You're almost home, almost done with today. Tomorrow you'll wake at 4 and do it all again, but that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you just need to get inside, wash somewhat, eat something, and collapse into unconsciousness that will pass for sleep. Your front door appears in the murk, number 17, painted on the frame in numbers that were probably white once. You reach for the handle with hands that shake slightly from exhaustion and accumulated damage. The door opens to the smell of boiled cabbage and the sound of your children's voices, normal sounds, domestic sounds, sounds that belong to a world separate from the gasworks, even though they're all connected by your daily labour. Your wife appears in the passage, takes one look at you, and points toward the washing basin without comment. This is routine. This is life. This is Victorian industrial progress, measured in one worker's exhausted body, trudging home through poisonous fog to do it all again tomorrow. You've survived another day. The victories are small in the gasworks, and survival counts as triumph. And now, as the door closes behind you, and the sounds of home begin to settle around your exhausted frame, there's something almost peaceful about having reached this moment. The end of another long day in London's industrial heart, where men turned coal into light and somehow survived the transformation themselves. Your wife is heating water for washing, moving quietly through the small space you call home, and the children's voices are fading towards sleep, that same sleep you'll soon find yourself, your body finally allowed to rest after 12 hours of relentless demand. Outside, beyond these thin brick walls, the gasworks continues its eternal operation through the night shift, the retorts still burning, the machinery still turning. London's appetite for light never pausing, never sleeping, just consuming endlessly the gas produced by men like you. But that's their concern now, the evening crew's responsibility, and you can let it all fade, the heat, the noise, the constant danger, into something distant and dreamlike, as if it happened to someone else in some other time. Tomorrow will come, of course, with its 4 o'clock waking and its long trudge through darkness toward those flaming stacks. But tomorrow exists in some other realm right now, and you can simply be here, in this moment, feeling the day's labor slowly releasing its grip on your consciousness. Your breathing deepening, your thoughts beginning to drift like fog across water, soft and formless, and requiring nothing of you except that you rest. The gasworks built Victorian London's nights, turned coal into illumination, powered an empire's ambitions through the labor of men who would never share its rewards. But those men also went home each evening, found what comfort they could in small domestic spaces, and discovered that even the hardest days eventually end, that sleep comes even to the exhausted, and that tomorrow, however difficult, is still just tomorrow, still distant, still something that can be faced when the sun rises again over London's sooty horizon, patient and inevitable, and far away enough to ignore for now. For now, just rest, just breathe, just let it all fade into the comfortable darkness where history blurs into dreams, and dreams ask nothing of tired bodies except that they finally, mercifully, gratefully stop moving and surrender to sleep.